Grant Hale pressed both hands against the locked orchard gate and looked down 18 acres of gray, tangled trees. "Well," he said, "Granddad left you enough firewood to survive the next century." The laugh came out of Elaine before she could disguise it as a cough. Judith joined half a second later, quieter but unmistakable. Their breaths smoked in the late winter air while Nora stood beside them, holding the brass key to the lower orchard. Beyond the gate, the cracked gravel lane curved past the old packing shed on the left and vanished among bare contour rows. The stone irrigation channel on the right was buried under black leaves. Brambles climbed through the fence. Several trees leaned so sharply that their roots showed like knuckles above the cold ground. Nora looked at her mother, then at her aunt, and finally at Grant. "I'm keeping it for one growing year." That made Elaine laugh again, not loudly. That would have been easier. It was a small, tired sound, the kind people made when someone they loved confirmed an embarrassing diagnosis. "Oh, Nora," she said. Nora slipped the key into her jacket pocket. There were many things she could have asked. Whether her grandfather had given her the orchard because he believed she could save it. Whether he had simply run out of worthwhile things after leaving the renovated farmhouse, liquid accounts, and newer machinery to everyone else. Whether Elaine's laughter meant she thought the land was dead or that Nora's future was. Instead, Nora held out her hand for the remaining keys. Elaine's smile disappeared. "You don't need to turn this into a performance. I need the shed key. It's on the ring. There are 3 keys on the ring. The long one." Nora examined them. All 3 were long. Grant pushed away from the gate. At 34, he still had the same talent he'd possessed at 14. He could make leaving look like a punishment for everyone who remained. His boots crunched over the gravel as he headed toward the pickup he had inherited from Walter, though technically the estate paperwork would not be final until Monday. "Try the rusty one," he called. "They're all rusty. Then you're already learning the property." Judith laughed again, but this time the sound broke off halfway. She pulled her red wool coat tighter and looked through the gate. For one strange second, Nora saw recognition move across her aunt's face. Not hope. Something older and less comfortable. "You remember it," Nora said. Judith glanced at Elaine. "Of course I remember it. When it was producing. They all produced once." Elaine tucked the estate folder beneath her arm. The folder was pale blue, clean-edged, and absurdly neat against the neglected hillside. She had labeled every section with white tabs in her narrow handwriting. Farmhouse, accounts, equipment, lower orchard. Nora's tab was last. "The question isn't what it did 20 years ago," Elaine said. "The question is what it will cost now." "That wasn't my question. Then ask a practical one." Nora almost smiled. Elaine's favorite word, practical, could mean affordable, obedient, painless, or already decided. Its meaning changed depending on what she wanted from you. "How much was in the orchard operating account?" Nora asked. Elaine shifted the folder to her other arm. "There is no separate operating account." "All right. How much was budgeted for cleanup?" "Nothing." "Property taxes?" "Due in June." "You saw the estimate." "I saw the county assessment." "Then you know." "Yes," Nora said. "I know." A car passed on the county road above them, tires humming over damp pavement. The 4 of them stood in the wake of the sound. Nora could smell wood smoke from somewhere across the ridge and the faint mineral dampness of the channel. Elaine softened first, which somehow hurt more. "You have 6 weeks left on your lease," she said. "You're working 3 days a week at the garden center because they cut winter hours. You have no health insurance worth speaking of, and that car of yours makes a noise every time you turn left. It makes the noise when I turn right. That is not better. No, I'm not trying to be cruel." Nora looked at the locked gate between them and 18 acres nobody else had wanted. Elaine exhaled. "You could sell it as is. Take what someone offers and put a deposit on a decent apartment. Finish your certification. Get a job with regular hours." "What certification?" Her mother blinked. The one I should finish. You've mentioned several. No, you've mentioned several. Grant started his pickup. The engine coughed, caught, and settled into a low diesel rattle. Through the windshield, he gestured at Elaine to hurry. Judith touched Nora's sleeve. Your grandfather let things get away from him at the end. The words were gentle, but Nora heard the warning inside them. Don't make his mistake. Walter had been dead 38 days. Nora could still picture his thumbnail, permanently split down the center, pointing along a branch as he explained where water sprouts would steal strength from fruiting wood. She could also picture the last year of his life, when he stopped returning calls and let groceries spoil in the farmhouse refrigerator because admitting he needed help felt, to him, like losing an argument. I know, Nora said. Judith lowered her hand. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. Elaine held out her palm. Give me the ring. I'll show you which key. Nora dropped the keys into it. Her mother chose the narrowest one, inserted it into the padlock, and had to wrestle it back and forth before the cylinder turned. The chain fell against the gate with a metallic clatter. There, Elaine said. Nora took the ring back. Thank you. Grant tapped the horn once. Elaine looked toward him, annoyed. That, at least, felt familiar. We're meeting the appraiser at the equipment barn. I thought the equipment was already valued. We need updated numbers. Grant tapped the horn again, longer. I'm going to kill him, Judith said. It was the first useful thing anyone had said all morning. Elaine started toward the vehicles, then turned. 1 year, one full growing year. And after that, I decide, based on what? What's alive? Elaine stared at her as if Nora had deliberately answered the wrong question. Then she walked away. Judith followed, stopping once to look back at the orchard. She seemed about to speak, but Grant leaned on the horn a third time, and she raised one gloved finger in his direction without turning around. Nora waited until both vehicles had climbed to the county road. She expected the quiet afterward to feel triumphant. It did not. The open gate sagged on its hinges. Wet gravel shone beneath her boots. Downhill, a loose panel on the packing shed roof knocked in the wind with the slow, uneven rhythm of someone trying to get out. She closed the gate behind her out of habit, though there was nothing inside worth stealing. The lane was worse than it had looked from the road. Water had cut a narrow trench down its center. Last summer's weeds lay flattened along both edges, their seed heads caught in Nora's trouser cuffs. She walked with her backpack over both shoulders and counted the first row automatically. 26 trees. 7 were plainly gone. One had split at the main crotch, exposing pale wood stained dark by rain. Another had fallen into its neighbor and hung there with its roots half lifted. The rest looked exhausted rather than dead, but she did not trust that impression. Walter had taught her enough to know that confidence with trees was often just ignorance standing at a flattering angle. She pulled a small notebook from her backpack. Row 1, she wrote. 26 total. 7 dead, 2 dangerous. Brambles throughout. The question mark after dead embarrassed her, though no one was there to see it. By the 4th row, her fingers were stiff. By the 8th, the scale of the place had begun to feel personal. Everywhere she looked, work multiplied. Limbs crossed and rubbed against one another, old fruit mummified black on branches. Deer had stripped bark from several younger trunks. The ground dipped where irrigation pipes had collapsed, and thorny vines knitted whole sections together so tightly that she had to go around. 18 acres had sounded like an inheritance in the lawyer's office. On foot, it sounded like a sentence. Near the lower boundary, Nora found one tree with an old metal tag embedded in the trunk. She scraped moss away with her thumbnail until she could read Walter's cramped lettering. York, lower 9. The bark had swollen around the wire. She remembered making tags at the packing shed table one August, both of them sweating through their shirts, while a box fan pushed hot air from one side of the room to the other. Walter had distrusted printed labels because, according to him, ink made by a machine had no commitment. She had teased him for that. He'd said, "Laugh all you like. My handwriting will outlive yours." It had. Nora stood with her thumb pressed against the tag until the cold reached through her jacket. "You could have cleaned the channel," she told him. Wind moved through the branches. The roof panel answered from uphill. She reached the packing shed shortly after noon. The long key did not work. Neither did the narrow one Elaine had used on the gate. The third stuck halfway into the lock and refused to turn. Nora set down her backpack, braced one boot against the doorframe, and worked the key until rust powdered her knuckles. The door opened suddenly, throwing her forward into darkness. The shed smelled of damp timber, mouse droppings, old apples, and the sweet rot of cardboard. Light came through gaps in the siding. An obsolete sorting line occupied most of the floor, its rubber belts cracked but still in place. Wooden bins stood stacked against the back wall. One had collapsed, spilling lid slats and curled packing paper across the concrete. Near the office partition, a brown recliner faced nothing. Nora stopped. The recliner had once sat in Walter's farmhouse den. Elaine must have moved it out here when she renovated after his hip surgery. Nora remembered Walter lowering himself into it at night with a mug balanced on his stomach, pretending not to sleep through baseball games. A gray work shirt still hung over the back. She crossed the shed slowly and picked it up. Dust lifted from the shoulders. The left cuff held a small crescent of blue paint, probably from the summer Walter made her repaint the irrigation gates and then criticize the color he had chosen himself. For 38 days, people had told Nora grief arrived in waves. Nobody mentioned the ordinary traps: a shirt, a handwritten tag, a chair positioned where no living person would choose to sit. She folded the shirt once and placed it on the desk. The desk drawers contained invoices, dull pencils, replacement bolts, and 3 peppermints fused to their wrappers. No message waited for her. No explanation for why Walter had assigned the orchard to the granddaughter with the least money and the fewest choices. On the wall above the desk hung an orchard map so faded that several row numbers had vanished. Nora took it down and spread it beside her notebook. Her phone showed 1 bar of service and a balance notification she had been avoiding. Rent would clear Friday, car insurance the following Tuesday. The garden center had scheduled her for 21 hours next week. She opened the calculator and entered the property tax estimate. Then she entered what remained in savings. The difference made her laugh once, sharply, in the empty shed. Elaine had been cruel at the gate. She'd also been right about the numbers. Nora sat in Walter's recliner and immediately sank 6 inches lower than expected. A spring groaned beneath her. She tried to shift upright, made it worse, and for a moment found herself trapped at an angle with both boots off the floor. "Excellent," she said. It took an undignified combination of rocking and swearing to escape. Outside, the day had brightened. A seam of blue opened above the western ridge. Nora ate a crushed peanut butter sandwich while sitting on the loading dock looking downhill at the rows. She tried to imagine the property cleared, then pruned, then irrigated. Her mind supplied money she did not have, machinery Grant would not lend, and 6 versions of Elaine saying "I told you so" without using those exact words. Nora finished the sandwich and returned to the first row with a folding saw. She chose a tree whose branches were bare, brittle-looking, and furred with lichen. If she could remove 1 dead tree before dark, she would at least have begun. The saw teeth had just bitten through the bark when a man's voice behind her said, "You planning to kill that one yourself, or you want the weather to finish the job?" Nora turned. Luis Ortega stood in the lane wearing a canvas coat, mud-streaked boots, and an expression of grave concern directed entirely at her saw. "This tree is dead," Nora said. Luis came closer, took 1 thin twig between his fingers, and bent it almost double without breaking it. "No," he said, "this tree is ugly." He released the twig. It sprang back toward the pale winter sky. "Those are not the same thing." Nora lowered the saw but did not close it. Louis stepped off the lane and crouched beside the trunk. He was somewhere in his late 50s, lean through the shoulders with a salt and pepper mustache and deep creases beside his mouth. Nora remembered those creases from summers when he and Walter had argued over thinning fruit. Luis always looked closest to smiling when he was most annoyed. "You're sure?" she asked. "No. Trees don't give guarantees. You sounded sure. I was sure about you being wrong." He took a pocket knife from his coat, scraped a shallow patch of bark near the base, and revealed a damp green line. "Living tissue," he said. "Not much vigor, but living." Nora crouched across from him. The cut she had started with the saw showed yellow wood beneath the bark. It looked fresh enough to accuse her. "Lickin' doesn't kill a tree," Luis said. "I know that." "Then why were you looking at it like it confessed?" "The branches looked brittle." "Looking brittle is not a horticultural category. Ugly is. Ugly is a warning not to make expensive decisions before lunch." Luis wiped the knife on his trousers and folded it shut. When he straightened, he looked past Nora toward the rows. His expression changed so slightly, she might have missed it if she had not spent years watching people decide what not to say. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I saw the gate open." "From your place?" "From the road. I was hoping somebody came to fix that hinge. Sorry to disappoint you." "You usually are." That was familiar enough to ease something in her chest. Luis had never treated Nora as delicate, even when she first worked for Walter and mistook endurance for technique. He had once watched her drag a full picking bag down 2 rows before informing her she had fastened the strap backward. When she demanded to know why he had waited, he said he was gathering evidence. He picked up her notebook from the grass. "Hey." He held it out of reach without appearing to. His gaze moved over the pages. "Dead question mark," he read. "Dangerous, brambles, possible canker. You walked 8 rows? 9. Lower 9 doesn't count if all you did was visit the York." Nora stared at him. "How do you know where I went? You have mud on your right boot from the washout below row 8 and burrs on your jacket from cutting across 9. You could just say you watched me. That would make me sound strange. You walked onto my property and took my notebook. Your gate was open. My gate was closed." Luis considered that. "Then I walked onto your property after opening your gate." She took the notebook from him. "That does sound strange." He looked toward the tree she had nearly cut. "What did Walter leave you besides this?" "Nothing that helps with this." "Equipment?" "Grant. Grant is not equipment. He inherited it." Luis made a low sound through his nose. "What?" Nora asked. "I'm thinking something unkind. You've never let that stop you. I'm older now." The wind lifted the hem of his coat. From somewhere deeper in the orchard came the dry clack of 2 crossing limbs. Luis walked to the next tree and pressed his thumb into a sunken patch of bark. "This one may be gone above the scaffold. That limb definitely is. See the little black bumps?" Nora moved closer. "Fruiting bodies," he said. "Infection has been in there a while. You cut this during wet weather. You carry trouble on the blade. So I wait. You clean your tools between cuts, and you wait for a dry stretch before you start pretending you're a pruning crew. I wasn't pretending to be a crew. You brought 1 saw to 18 acres. I was pretending to be an understaffed crew." That earned the smallest movement at the corner of his mouth. He continued uphill, stopping at trunks without asking permission. Nora followed because irritation was cheaper than ignorance. At one tree, he bent a branch. At another, he dug the heel of his boot into the soil. He showed her narrow bark wounds left by borers and the rough collars where Walter had once made clean cuts. He did not touch the worst of the fallen trees. Those, he said, could wait until she knew which direction they wanted to kill her from. At row 4, Luis stepped back and studied the canopy. "What do you see?" "Too many vertical shoots. Crowded center. Dead wood on the south side. What else?" Nora circled the trunk. Several upper branches had grown beyond reach, making a dark cage against the sky. Lower spurs looked weak but intact. "Last year's growth is short," she said, "but it had some." That means it wasn't completely dormant. Trees are always completely dormant or not dormant. There's no partly asleep because you feel sorry for them. You know what I meant? I do. Keep going. She noticed a few shriveled apples hidden near the top, then found a plump bud on a branch, no thicker than her finger. Fruit bud. Maybe. You can say yes, I can say maybe. She broke into a grin before she could stop herself. You're enjoying this. I've had a difficult winter. They spent nearly an hour in 4 rows. Luis corrected her counts, then corrected his own when she made him scrape a trunk he had written off. Green appeared beneath the bark. Nora folded her arms. Living tissue. Barely. Looking barely alive is not a horticultural category. It is when I say it. By the time they returned to the lane, Nora's original inventory felt less useful than a collection of first impressions. Luis handed back the folding saw. Don't cut anything today. I can remove brambles. Can you identify poison ivy without leaves? Yes. Can you identify it after you're tired? Nora hesitated. Go fix the gate hinge, he said. I don't have the hardware. You don't have most things. You always this encouraging with your neighbors, only the ones holding saws. He started uphill. Luis. He stopped. Nora hated how difficult the next sentence felt. Would you walk the rest with me? He looked over his shoulder, not rescuing her by pretending to misunderstand. Today? Not necessarily. I have pruning at my place. I can pay you something. With what? She glanced toward the packing shed. Please don't offer me that chair, he said. I was thinking labor. For every day I spend here, you work one for me. Doing what? Whatever I need. That's vague. Yes. What if you need me to paint irrigation gates? I remember your work. I would not. Nora looked downhill. The rows followed the hillside's contours, rising and dropping with the land. From this angle, the orchard seemed even larger because the farther sections vanished into brush before reappearing lower down. How many days, she asked. To make the first pass? 3, maybe 4. You keep notes. You make the decisions. 4 days here, 4 at your place, 5 at mine. Why 5? My trees aren't trying to murder you. 4 and I help during harvest. You don't know if you'll be here during harvest. The words landed cleanly. Luis did not soften them. Nora hooked her thumbs into her jacket pockets. Neither do you. He turned fully then. You heard the will terms? She asked. I heard Elaine got the house and Grant got the machines. That wasn't what I meant. I heard what was left. What people thought of it? Luis glanced toward the county road. People think from inside warm rooms. My family did it at the gate. They always were efficient. Despite herself, Nora laughed. Luis's face remained serious. 4 days now. 4 at my place. If you are still here at harvest, we talk about harvest. And the pruning platform? We did not talk about the platform. I'm talking about it now. You don't even know what needs pruning. I know I can't reach it. Congratulations. That is the first accurate entry in your notebook. He continued toward the gate. Nora followed him as far as the loading yard. Before leaving, Luis bent to examine the warped hinge. He kicked loose gravel away from the bottom post, opened and closed the gate twice, then pointed to a place where the metal strap had pulled halfway through rotten wood. Not hardware, he said. Post. Can I brace it? For a while. With what? Luis looked at the piles of discarded timber beside the packing shed. You own a dead orchard and can't find a piece of wood? I've been the owner for 3 hours. Then you're behind. After he drove away, Nora carried 2 lengths of weathered lumber to the gate. One crumbled when she dropped it. The other held. She found a bucket of bent nails in the shed, straightened 3 against the loading dock with a hammer, and managed to brace the post badly enough that the gate no longer dragged. It took almost 2 hours. When she finished, she opened and closed it just to hear the hinge move without scraping stone. The result was unimpressive and immediately useful. Nora photographed it. She nearly sent the picture to Elaine. Her thumb hovered above her mother's name before she locked the phone and put it away. Elaine would see temporary bracing where Nora saw a gate that worked. Neither interpretation was entirely wrong. The garden center called as she walked back to the shed. Her manager asked if she could cover Thursday morning, then apologized before explaining that the shift would end at noon instead of 4. A delivery had been postponed. Hours were thin. "I can do it," Nora said. "You sure? It's only 4 hours." "I'm sure." After the call, she sat on the loading dock with the orchard map across her knees. She wrote Luis's name beside the next 4 days, then drew a square around the tax figure. She needed another source of income. She also needed time here. Every paid hour protected the orchard from one kind of failure, while every hour away exposed it to another. Her apartment lease ended in 6 weeks. Renewal would require a higher deposit and 12 months commitment. The packing shed had electricity in half its outlets, a utility sink that coughed brown water, and a small back room Walter had once used for records. It was not a residence. It did, however, have a door and enough floor space for a cot. Nora went inside to inspect it. The back room held a metal cabinet, 3 sacks of hardened mineral mix, and a chest freezer with its lid propped open by a broom handle. Something had nested in the insulation. The window was cracked. A dark stain spread across one ceiling corner beneath the loose roof panel. "Charming," she said. She imagined Elaine's face if she knew Nora was considering it. That alone was almost enough to make the idea attractive, which meant it was a bad reason. Saving rent was a better one. Nora moved the sacks and swept around the cabinet. Mouse droppings gathered in the dustpan. Wind pressed against the cracked window, producing a high whistle that stopped whenever she touched the frame. By dusk, she had cleared a rectangle large enough for a cot and found an old electric kettle that worked if she held the cord at an angle. She boiled water, watched flecks of mineral sediment rotate in it, and decided tea was not worth proving a point. Her phone rang again. This time it was Grant. "What did you do to the gate?" he asked. Nora looked toward the open shed door. "Fixed it. With lumber from the loading yard?" "Yes." "That wood belongs to the estate. The loading yard belongs to me. The loose materials weren't included in the parcel. It was a rotten board, Grant. That isn't the point. It was, Nora realized, exactly the point. Not the board. The fact that she had touched something without asking which part of the family was entitled to object. "Did you call because you need the board back?" "I called because Mom said you're spending the year there. I said I'm keeping it for a year. Same difference." "No, it isn't." Grant breathed into the phone. In the background, a metal door rolled shut. He was probably at the equipment barn, standing among Walter's tractor, sprayer, mower, and flatbed trailer, the useful inheritance. "You should think before you sink money into cleanup," he said. "I don't have money to sink. That's supposed to reassure me? Why do you need reassurance?" Silence. Then Grant said, too casually, "Because when you get tired of this, somebody will have to deal with it." Nora looked through the doorway at the first bare rose. The tree she had nearly cut stood among them, crooked and gray, holding its life where nobody could see it. "I'll deal with it," she said. She ended the call before he could laugh. The tree was still standing when Luis returned 2 mornings later, and he acknowledged this with a solemn nod. "Good," he said. "You followed one instruction." Nora handed him a paper cup of coffee. He accepted it, took a sip, and looked offended. "What is this?" "Coffee. It tastes like you filtered it through the recliner. The gas station made it." "Then why are you taking credit?" She took the cup back. "You've lost coffee privileges." Luis had brought 2 rolls of flagging tape, one orange and one blue, along with a pair of long-handled pruners, polished from years of use. He tied both rolls to his belt, opened Nora's notebook to a clean page, and drew 3 columns. Remove, watch, work. "Not alive and dead?" she asked. "Alive can still be useless. Dead can still be useful. For firewood, for habitat, erosion, keeping you from driving somewhere you shouldn't." He pointed at the slope below the first row. "You remove everything at once. The hill moves when spring rain comes. We take down hazards first, diseased wood next. Stumps stay until the ground tells us otherwise." Nora studied the columns. And work? Trees with enough structure to justify labor. That sounds cheerful. It is a farm, not a greeting card. They began at the gate. Luis marked obvious removals in orange and uncertain trees in blue. The first blue ribbon went around the one Nora had nearly cut. I'm never going to hear the end of that, am I? If it lives, no. If it dies, I will stop mentioning it out of respect. Most decisions took longer. Luis made Nora explain each one before he touched the tape. At first, she relied too heavily on bark color and canopy shape. He kept directing her lower, to swelling buds, root flares, old pruning wounds, and the length of the previous season's growth. Some trees were easy. One pear-shaped trunk had cracked almost to its base and shifted audibly when the wind blew. Another had bark peeling from dead wood in broad plates. But several gray, miserable-looking trees showed green beneath a careful scrape. Others appeared sound until Luis pressed a thumb into rotten tissue hidden behind old grass. By the middle of row 3, Nora had stopped seeing an orchard. She saw hundreds of separate verdicts. Luis stopped her beside a tree with 2 main leaders leaning apart. "Call it," he said. "Remove the left leader. Keep the right." "Why?" "Left has a canker below the first lateral. Right has better structure. And then, thin the water sprouts. Reduce height gradually. Not all this year." He waited. What variety?" Nora searched the limbs for a tag and found only the rusted loop where one had been. The bark pattern offered no help. No fruit remained. "I don't know." "Then write that." "Does it change the pruning?" "Maybe not. It changes what you know." She wrote unknown variety beside row 3, tree 11. Luis tapped the page. People lie when they leave blanks empty. Fill them with what you don't know. Walter had hated admitting uncertainty. He could transform "I forgot" into a 7-minute lecture on why the forgotten thing had never mattered. Nora had inherited enough of that tendency to recognize the insult. "Did you teach him this way?" she asked. "Your grandfather did not enjoy being taught." "That wasn't my question." Luis tugged the orange tape tight around a dead trunk and cut it with his knife. "When I started here, Walter would ask what I thought, then spend an hour explaining why I was wrong. Later, he'd do what I suggested and claim the weather told him. That sounds like him. The weather was very smart." They reached the York tree near noon. Luis rested his palm against the old metal tag embedded in the trunk. He should have cut that wire years ago. He said his handwriting would outlive mine. It may outlive the tree if you leave it. Nora used pliers to snip the wire. The tag came away reluctantly, exposing a pale groove where the trunk had grown around it. She put the tag in her pocket. Luis watched but said nothing. They ate lunch on overturned bins in the loading yard. Nora had brought turkey sandwiches. Luis had brought 2 hard-boiled eggs, an orange, and a small glass jar filled with green sauce. "What is that?" she asked. "Something your sandwich needs." "My sandwich is fine." He unscrewed the jar and poured a stripe of sauce over his egg. Nora's eyes watered from across the bin. "That can remove paint. It might help your coffee." He offered the jar. She put 1 drop on the corner of her sandwich and spent the next minute pretending she was not in pain. Luis peeled his orange with infuriating calm. When her eyes stopped streaming, Nora said, "Why did you leave? Your grandfather's orchard? You were foreman here longer than anyone, seasonal foreman. You knew every row. I still know most. So why did you stop coming?" Luis separated the orange into exact sections. Walter stopped calling. "That's it? That is usually how seasonal work ends. But you were friends. We worked together. You came to the funeral. So did the man who sold him propane." Nora stared toward the shed. The loose roof panel was still there. She had found a ladder behind the sorting line, but 2 rungs were cracked, and the roof pitch was steeper than it looked from below. "He got worse after Grandma died," she said. "Yes." "I tried to help." "I know. He told me everything was under control." Luis ate an orange section. "You knew it wasn't," Nora said. "Yes." "Did you come out here?" "Twice." "He turned me away twice." You could have told us. I told Elaine. Nora's sandwich stopped halfway to her mouth. When? The first year the channel went uncleared. I said he was missing spray windows and leaving fruit on the ground. She said she'd talk to him. Did she? I don't know. Nora knew. Elaine had probably called Walter from her clean kitchen and accepted his first irritated assurance, because pressing harder would have meant driving out, looking and choosing what to do next. You could have called me, Nora said. You were 23 and working in North Carolina. I would have come. Yes. Something in the answer angered her more than doubt would have. You say that like it was a reason not to tell me. Louise set down the orange peel. Walter was a grown man, sick, stubborn, grieving, but grown. He asked me to stay off his land. And now? Now it is not his land. Nora looked at the notebook beside her. Orange and blue marks covered 3 rows. Walter's handwriting had survived on the tag in her pocket, but his decisions had survived everywhere. Luis wiped his knife clean. You want somebody to blame because blame has lighter handles than grief. You don't get to tell me what I want. No. But you asked why I left. I asked for an answer, not a proverb. That was the answer. He stood and carried his scraps to the shed. Nora stayed on the bin until she could trust herself to speak without making the argument larger than the truth. Luis had called Elaine. Walter had refused help. Luis had obeyed him. None of those facts canceled the others. When he returned, she handed him the notebook. Row 4, she said. They worked until the light went flat and cold. By the end of the day, they had assessed only 6 rows. 34 trees carried orange tape. 51 wore blue. The rest had instructions recorded beside them. Remove dead leader. Inspect roots. Open center slowly. Monitor canker. Identify after bloom. It was not good news. It was also not 18 acres of firewood. Nora stood at the gate after Luis left and looked back. The ribbons moved in the evening wind, bright spots among the gray branches. Orange appeared less often than she had feared. Blue appeared more often than she wanted. Her phone showed a message from Elaine. Dinner Sunday, 6, Judith coming. Please answer. Nora typed working and erased it. Then she typed, okay. The farmhouse kitchen smelled of lemon cleaner and pot roast when Nora arrived Sunday evening. Elaine had replaced Walter's old curtains with white shades and moved the table to face the valley instead of the orchard. The room looked larger without his clutter. It also looked like no one had ever repaired a mower carburetor on newspaper there. Grant stood at the counter opening a bottle of wine. Judith was transferring carrots into a serving dish as if the operation required secrecy. Elaine looked at Nora's work jacket. You could have changed. I did. This is a different shirt. You have mud on your sleeve. It's a different mud. Judith bit her lip. Grant poured wine into 4 glasses. How's the lumber business? Slow. Trees keep being alive. His hand paused above Nora's glass. What? Some of them are alive. Bare branches in February. Incredible discovery. Luis is helping me assess them. Elaine set a carving knife beside the roast. The blade made a small, precise sound against the platter. Luis Ortega? Yes. Why? He knows the orchard. He hasn't worked there in years. He knows more than I do. Grant carried the glasses to the table. What's that costing? Labor exchange? What kind of labor? Mine. He laughed, though not as comfortably as he had at the gate. You can't prune 18 acres by trading favors with a neighbor. I'm not pruning 18 acres at once. Elaine began carving. I don't want you owing people. I owe 4 days. And after that, I decide what help I need. You keep saying that. Elaine placed a slice of roast on the platter, as if deciding is the same as being able to afford it. Nora pulled out her chair. I'm not renewing my apartment. The carving knife stopped. Judith looked up from the carrots. Grant was the first to understand. You're not living in that shed. It has a back room. It has rats, Elaine said. Mice. That distinction is not reassuring. I'll seal it. There's no bathroom. There's a utility sink and enough space to install a shower stall later. Luis said I can use the facilities at his packing house in the meantime. Elaine put down the knife. You discussed this with Luis before discussing it with me? Nora looked at her mother across Walter's polished table. I'm 27, she said. I wasn't aware my housing required an executor. Elaine's face went still in the way it always did when anger had to pass through manners before reaching daylight. Don't be theatrical, she said. I'm answering the question. You're making it sound as though I'm controlling you. You just asked why I discussed where I'm going to live with someone before discussing it with you. Because apparently you intend to sleep in a storage room with mice. Again, Grant said, sitting down. Those might be rats. Judith carried the carrots to the table. Nobody has inspected them closely enough to know. Nora glanced at her. Judith's mouth twitched. Elaine remained standing at the head of the table. The farmhouse has a guest room. Grant looked up. It does? You use it twice a year. I use it at Thanksgiving. You fall asleep in front of the television at Thanksgiving. That's tradition. Elaine ignored him. Nora can stay here until she finds somewhere suitable. The offer caught Nora off guard. Her mother had spent the past month sorting Walter's possessions, replacing his furniture, and making the farmhouse unmistakably her own. Nora had not expected even a temporary invitation. Thank you, she said carefully. But I need to be at the orchard. You can drive down. Every morning and evening, it's 4 minutes, if my car starts. Then get the car fixed instead of putting money into a shower stall. With what money? The question came out sharper than Nora intended. Elaine glanced at Grant, who lowered his wine glass. Nora understood the arrangement in that glance. Elaine would let her sleep in the guest room. She might pay a mechanic if Nora asked correctly and accepted the lecture that came with it. But the help would always point away from the orchard. Nora could be supported as long as she agreed to become the version of herself Elaine knew how to rescue. I appreciate the offer, Nora said. I'm moving into the shed. Then why tell us? Elaine asked. I wasn't telling all of you. I was answering Grant. Don't bring me into this, Grant said. You're already here. He reached for the potatoes. Barely. Judith sat beside Nora and passed her the carrots. Under the table, her knee bumped Nora's once lightly. Dinner began without anyone declaring it had begun. Forks touched plates. Elaine asked Judith about a plumbing problem at her house. Grant complained that the estate appraiser had undervalued Walter's flatbed trailer. Nora ate pot roast that tasted exactly as it had when she was 15 and tried not to notice the empty patch of wall where Walter's orchard calendar used to hang. When the conversation reached a silence, she said, I need to borrow the brush mower. Grant looked at her over his glass. No, I'll cover fuel. No, for one day. It needs servicing. I can service it. That's not the issue. What is? He cut a potato into smaller and smaller pieces. It's mine. The simplicity of the answer silenced her. Grant's hand tightened around his fork. He seemed almost sorry, then irritated that she had made him feel it. Nora set down her own fork. What about the pruning platform? Same answer. Walter used both on the lower orchard. Walter used everything everywhere. The parcels are divided now. Elaine placed her napkin beside her plate. Grant has to protect the value of what he inherited. From me? From where? The mower was built in 2009 and somehow survived this long, Grant said, because Luis maintained it. Then borrow Luis's. That's what I'll do. Grant's eyes moved to her face and away. Good. Nora heard the relief in it. He wanted her request gone more than he wanted the equipment useful. After dinner, Judith found Nora putting on her jacket near the back door. I have a cot, she said quietly. Nora looked toward the kitchen. Elaine was sealing leftovers into glass containers. Grant stood in the hall talking on his phone in a low voice about resale prices. A camping cot, a decent one, aluminum frame. It's been in my basement since I moved. You don't have to do that, I'm aware. Nora studied her aunt. Why did you laugh? Judith looked down at the gloves in her hands. Because, Elaine laughed. You're 61. I didn't say it was a good reason. From the hallway, Grant said, "If he won't meet the reserve, I'll list it separately." He noticed Nora listening and stepped farther from the doorway. Judith followed Nora's gaze. "He's selling the equipment. He just said he had to protect its value. Selling protects it from becoming less valuable. That sounds like something Elaine would say. It probably is." Judith held out a small brass key. "Basement door. I'll leave the cot by the steps tomorrow." Nora took it. "Thank you. Don't make this forgiveness." "I wasn't." "Good." Judith squeezed Nora's wrist, then released it so quickly the gesture might have been accidental. The cot fit in Nora's hatchback only after she folded the rear seats and drove with its frame pressing against her shoulder. Over the following week, the rest of her belongings arrived in smaller, humiliating loads. 2 plastic bins of clothes, a kettle, a hot plate, bedding, towels, books, and a lamp with no shade. Everything she owned could be carried through the packing shed door in under an hour. She spent her last night at the apartment listening to the upstairs tenant pace and the refrigerator motorcycle on and off. The room looked wider without her boxes. Pale rectangles marked where pictures had protected the wall from dust. The landlord inspected the floor, deducted money for a stain that had been present when Nora moved in, and wished her luck with a tone that suggested luck would need her forwarding address. At the orchard, rain had darkened the shed siding almost black. Nora set the cot beneath the driest portion of the backroom ceiling. She patched the window with clear plastic, taped foam around the door, and installed a smoke detector above the filing cabinet. The detector came from Elaine. It appeared one morning in a grocery bag hanging from the gate, along with 2 mousetraps, a fire extinguisher, and a note that said nothing except check the batteries monthly. Nora sent a message. "Got them. Thank you." Elaine replied with a thumbs-up symbol she had likely spent several minutes locating. Louise arrived before Nora decided whether the exchange counted as tenderness. He brought the pruning platform but made her walk beside it while he towed it down the lane at the speed of a tired dog. The machine was older than Nora and painted a shade of yellow no longer found in nature. "Hydraulics drift," Louise said. "If the platform starts lowering, do not crawl under it to investigate." "I know, you don't. I know not to crawl under machinery. That is different from knowing you won't." They began with the strongest trees near the upper rows. Louise demonstrated the 3-cut method on a heavy dead limb so its weight would not tear bark down the trunk. Nora had done the cut before, but not for years. Her first undercut was too shallow. Her second landed too far from the branch collar. Louise pointed to the stub. "That tree will be thinking about your mistake longer than you will. Can I correct it?" "Yes." Which is why I pointed instead of complaining privately. By noon, Nora's shoulders trembled whenever she lifted the saw. The canopy produced more wood than she imagined possible. They stacked diseased branches separately and dragged healthy brush toward the loading yard for chipping later. "Don't open it all at once," Louise warned when Nora studied the crowded top of a surviving wine sap. "Tree has been shaded for years. You expose every limb now, bark gets sunburned. New growth explodes. You trade one problem for 3, so we leave it ugly. We leave it balanced. Those are not the same thing. Now you're learning." A branch caught Nora across the cheek as it dropped. The scratch burned, and Louise examined it only long enough to confirm she was not bleeding impressively. "You'll live," he said. "You sound disappointed. I had $5 on stitches." For 4 days they moved through the rows, pruning only trees sturdy enough to justify the time. The orchard changed in details rather than appearance. A patch of sky opened inside one canopy. A dangerous limb no longer hung over the lane. Brush piles grew along the loading yard. Orange-marked trunks remained standing until they could be dropped safely. Then Nora went to Louise's orchard to repay the first half of her labor. His land began beyond the ridge, where rows followed gentler slopes, and the trees stood lower, cleaner, and evenly spaced. Nora expected to feel envy. Instead, the order made her suspicious. Every row seemed to know what it was doing. Louise handed her loppers and pointed toward a long line of young trees. "Remove root suckers. Leave the graft unions alone. You trust me with your trees now? No. That is why I chose a job close to the ground. They worked separately until Nora found a graft tie cutting into bark. She called him over rather than fixing it herself. Luis crouched, removed the tie, and rubbed the shallow groove with his thumb. I did that one, he said. You wrapped it too tight? Last spring. Nora waited for an explanation. Luis stood. Put it in your notebook. It's your mistake. Still useful. By late afternoon, her back ached from bending. Luis's orchard looked unchanged despite hours of work, which made Nora understand how easily labor disappeared into a functioning system. Neglect was visible. Maintenance erased its own evidence. When she returned to the lower orchard after dark, headlights swept across the shed and caught something white against the door. A second grocery bag hung from the latch. Inside were clean sheets, a small first aid kit, and the gray work shirt Nora had left folded on Walter's desk. It had been washed. The blue paint crescent remained on the cuff. There was no note. Nora stood beneath the bare bulb holding the shirt. She did not know whether Elaine had brought it, or Judith, or whether one had asked the other. She pressed the fabric to her face. It smelled of ordinary detergent instead of dust. That night, rain began hard enough to drum against the repaired sections of roof and slip steadily through the section Nora had not reached. She woke to cold water striking her ankle. The plastic basin she shoved beneath the leak filled faster than expected. A second drip appeared over the filing cabinet, then a third beside the cot. Nora moved her bedding, cursed the roof, and spent an hour arranging buckets by flashlight. Near dawn, the rain softened. Nora was pouring a full bucket into the utility sink when she heard another sound beneath the dripping eaves, a low, steady trickle outside the right wall. She carried the flashlight around the shed. Rainwater had entered the old stone channel above the loading yard. The lower section was still clogged, but for 20 feet clear water moved between the stones Walter had laid decades ago. Nora crouched beside it in the wet grass. The flow was narrow enough to cover with one hand. It was still moving downhill. Nora followed the water uphill until the flashlight beam weakened in the growing morning. The channel ran along the orchard's right boundary, narrow and stone-lined, descending from a concrete gate near the upper fence. Walter had built sections of it by hand before Nora was born, setting flat stones against the slope so water could travel by gravity to outlets along the rows. Now leaves, silt, and blackberry roots filled most of its length. Rainwater had found a temporary path through the first clearing and stopped against a mat of debris 30 yards below. Nora pulled at the blockage. Cold water rushed over both wrists and filled her sleeves. The mat held. She braced one boot against the channel wall, tugged harder, and came away backward with an armful of wet leaves, one length of rotted hose, and a dead opossum. She landed in the grass. The opossum landed on her chest. Nora made a sound she would later deny and launched it downhill with both hands. By the time Luis arrived, she had changed shirts and positioned the animal respectfully beneath a tree where nobody would ever have to discuss the manner of its removal. "You smell terrible," he said. "Good morning." He inspected the water, then the mud on Nora's braid. "You fell in." "I slipped." "You have leaves inside your collar." It was complicated. Luis traced the channel upstream. At the concrete gate, he lifted a rusted metal handle and let it fall. "This controls the feed from the spring box," he said. "Rain is bypassing it through that crack. Gate is stuck closed, so the water I saw was rainwater behaving opportunistically. It still moved. Water does that." Nora crouched by the gate. The metal plate had corroded into its frame, and roots bulged beneath one corner. "Can it be repaired?" "Everything can be repaired if you stop asking what it costs." "How much?" "I don't know." "You said everything." "I said if you stop asking." He used a shovel to expose the stonework around the gate. The channel wall had bowed inward but had not collapsed. That was the first piece of luck. The second was finding the old bypass line beneath the leaves, clogged rather than broken. They spent the morning clearing it with a flexible rod, buckets, and language Luis claimed not to understand when Nora used it. Mud came free in dense black plugs. A knot of roots followed. When the rod finally broke through, trapped water coughed from the lower outlet and soaked Luis from his knees down. Nora sat on the bank laughing. Luis looked at his wet trousers. "You knew that would happen. I hoped. Get the shovel." They cleared enough of the channel to keep rain from spilling across the lane, but Luis refused to open the spring feed until they had inspected every lower section. "If you send full flow into a collapse, you make a hole," he said. "How big?" "That depends on how badly you want to drive into it." The work added another page to Nora's notebook. 20 feet needed resetting. 2 outlets were missing caps. 1 pipe had been crushed where a tree root lifted the ground. None of it was catastrophic by itself. Together, the repairs consumed the number she had written beside June taxes. She underlined the tax figure twice. The packing shed roof had to come first. Nora bought sealant, roofing screws, and enough secondhand metal to replace the worst panel. The purchase used most of her garden center paycheck. She stood at the register removing work gloves, a better drill bit, and a roll of flashing tape until the total fit what she had in checking. At the orchard, she discovered that the second-hand roofing was 3 inches shorter than the damaged section. Luis found her on the ladder holding the panel in place with one knee. "You measure this?" he called. "Yes." "With what?" "A tape measure." "Did you read it?" Nora looked down. "I'm busy." He took the ladder with both hands. "Come down before your inheritance becomes a memorial. The panel could still be used if they shifted it and patched the upper gap with sound metal cut from the damaged sheet." Luis made Nora descend while he climbed, then refused to work until she tied back the loose cuff of Walter's gray shirt. "This was his," he said. "I know. He caught that sleeve in the sorting line once." Nora looked at the faded fabric. "He never told me." He did not enjoy stories where the machine won. They finished near sunset. The roof remained mismatched and visibly old, one dark panel among weathered silver, but the next rain stayed outside the back room. Nora lay awake on the cot listening for drops that did not come. On Saturday morning, her phone displayed a listing Grant had posted for Walter's brush mower. He had photographed it in front of the equipment barn, washed and polished, with the orchard ridge visible behind it. The description called it lightly used. Nora enlarged the picture. A dent on the side panel had come from Walter backing into the packing shed in 2016. Luis had hammered the metal flat enough to protect the belt housing. Lightly used was a generous interpretation. She messaged Grant. "You're selling the mower?" 3 dots appeared, vanished, then returned. "I told you the equipment was mine. I asked to borrow it for 1 day. I told you it needed service. The listing says recently serviced." Another pause. "It was serviced yesterday." Nora typed 3 different replies and erased them all. The mower was his. That fact did not become less true because he was selfish with it. Luis arranged for her to borrow an older flail mower from a grower, farther up the road in exchange for 2 days stacking bins. It leaked hydraulic fluid and had to be transported on Luis's trailer, but it cut the dead weeds between the strongest upper rows. Nora drove slowly, avoiding exposed roots and the blue-marked trees. Behind her, the orchard floor emerged in rough strips of green and brown. The visual change was so immediate that it frightened her. For the first time, she could look down 3 full rows without brush, swallowing the distance. The trees appeared straighter, simply because the ground beneath them was visible. Even the orange ribbons looked less final. She stopped the mower and took a photograph. This time, she sent it to Elaine. Her mother replied 20 minutes later. "Don't operate that alone. Nothing about the rows." Nora put the phone away. The following afternoon, Judith's sedan appeared at the gate. She drove down the cracked lane at walking speed, avoiding every pothole as if Nora had arranged them personally. Nora met her near the loading yard. "You brought the shirt." Judith turned off the engine. Hello to you, too. And the sheets. I brought the sheets. Elaine washed the shirt. Nora had expected the opposite. She came into the shed. She stood outside and handed it to me. Why didn't she leave it with the other things? Because the fire extinguisher was practical. The shirt was not. Judith climbed out carrying a paper grocery sack. I brought soup. What's wrong with it? It's soup. You don't cook. I purchased soup. That's safer. Judith looked across the opened rows. The joke faded from her face. Nora followed her gaze. Bright green showed at the edges of several buds. The color was small, but after weeks of gray, it seemed almost loud. I came to talk to you, Judith said. You usually do that after soup. Elaine's worried. She has many opportunities to tell me. She thinks you'll hear it differently from me. Why? Because I'm not your mother. You laughed at the gate. Judith shut the car door harder than necessary. Yes, Nora, I know. Do you? What would you like me to do? Deny it? I'd like to know what you're doing here. Judith held the grocery sack against her coat. Your mother thinks you're pouring everything you have into this because you can't bear to let your grandfather be gone. The words found their mark because they were not entirely wrong. Nora looked toward the shed roof. Did Elaine say that, or did you? Does it matter? Yes. Judith sighed. She said you're being stubborn. I made it sound kinder. Thank you for translating. I came because somebody has to say there's no shame in stopping before you lose what little you have. Did you say that to Grant before he listed the mower? That's different. Why? Because equipment has a known value. The answer sat between them, ugly in its honesty. Nora turned toward the channel. The soup can go in the shed. Judith followed reluctantly. Before they reached the loading yard, the sound of moving water came through the grass. It was not rain. Nora and Luis had cleared another 100 feet and freed the upper gate with penetrating oil, a jack, and several hours of patient force. The spring feed was open only a fraction, enough to test the repaired sections. Clear water slipped along the right boundary, flashing between the reset stones. Judith stopped. Her face altered so completely that Nora did not speak. I haven't heard that in years, Judith said. Neither had I. Judith walked to the channel and crouched despite her good trousers. She put her fingertips into the current. Your grandfather used to open it before breakfast. Your grandmother could hear it from the upstairs window. Nora had never known that. Elaine hated the sound, Judith continued. It meant he was already outside, and she knew he'd make us work before it got hot. A laugh escaped her, but this one held no ridicule. She used to hide in the pantry when he came looking. Mom? She was better at hiding than I was. Nora tried to picture Elaine pressed between shelves of canned peaches, while Walter called from the yard. The image felt impossible, and therefore precious. Judith stood, wiping wet fingers on her coat. Her gaze traveled over the vines massed along the next row. Those all have to come out? Most of them. How? Cut at the base. Pull them after they loosen. Dig the crowns where we can. Judith stared at the thorns. Nora expected another warning. Instead, her aunt set the grocery sack on the loading dock and took off her coat. What are you doing? Do you have gloves? You'll ruin your clothes. I'm 61. Apparently, I'm allowed to make bad decisions. Nora found her a spare pair. Judith lasted 53 minutes. She complained for 48 of them, caught her sweater on thorns 3 times, and developed a blister below her right thumb. But she did not leave until they had freed the first tree in row 7 from a vine as thick as Nora's wrist. Beneath it, low branches held clusters of swelling buds. Judith touched one with the back of her finger. Don't tell Elaine I helped, she said. Nora handed her the unopened soup. I won't have to. Judith looked at her blister and smiled despite herself. No, she said. I suppose you won't. Judith left one glove behind. Nora found it beneath the freed tree after her aunt's sedan disappeared up the lane. The fingertips were stained green, and one thorn had pierced the leather near the thumb. Nora set it on the loading dock rather than calling after her. The next morning, Louis stopped at row 7 and examined the pile of vines. You had help? Judith. He looked toward the road as if expecting her to still be there. She used to hide behind the sorting line during harvest. So did Mom. Elaine hid. Judith ate. That sounds more believable. Luis inspected the cuts at the base of the vines. Your aunt did these. Some. I can tell. Should I be insulted on her behalf? You should sharpen the loppers before she comes back. She might not. Luis lifted one freed branch and found the swelling buds beneath it. Might is useful. They finished the first inventory 4 days later. Nora sat at Walter's desk with the orchard map taped flat and every standing trunk marked in pencil. 612 trees remained across the old planting positions. 132 needed removal. 83 belonged in the watch column. The remaining 397 had enough living structure to justify some degree of work. She checked the arithmetic twice. 397 was not a crop. Some might flower weekly. Some might spend the season producing leaves and nothing else. Several could still fail once warm weather revealed damage winter had hidden. But the number changed the room around her. Luis stood over the desk eating one of Walter's ancient peppermints. He had peeled the fused wrapper away in fragments and claimed the white residue was sugar. Those are years old, Nora said. Sugar is older. That isn't an argument. He pointed at the map. You have too many in work. You agreed with every mark. I agreed they can respond. Not that you can reach all of them. So which ones do I abandon? Not abandon. Prioritize. They're already prioritized. Luis slid a pencil from the desk and drew a boundary around the upper 6 rows, where drainage was better and the surviving canopies were strongest. Then he circled 3 middle rows with fewer trees, but healthier spurs. You do these properly, he said. Then whatever time remains goes elsewhere. That's less than half. That is still more than one person. I have you. You have 4 days of me. You already spent them. I worked 4 days at your place and did an acceptable job. High praise. He set the pencil down. You will have me sometimes. That is different from having me. Nora looked at the uncircled rows. She had walked each one, scraped bark, bent twigs, and written instructions. Leaving them tangled now felt like making a promise and breaking it. Luis tapped the map. A bad orchard tries to make you fail everywhere at once. Don't help it. She hated the sentence enough to know she needed it. Work narrowed without becoming smaller. Nora removed dead and crossing limbs from the priority rows. She cut vines, cleared outlets, and spread compost in careful rings, rather than broadcasting it across acreage she could not afford to feed. The compost arrived in a borrowed dump trailer and steamed in the cold morning air. She paid for it with money reserved for car repairs and drove for 2 weeks with a grinding noise on right turns. Between rows, she seeded clover and a low flowering mix meant to hold soil and attract pollinators. Much of the seed stuck to her damp gloves. A gust took one expensive handful and scattered it across the loading yard. Luis watched the seeds bounce over gravel. You'll have a beautiful parking area, he said. Go away. I came to help. Then stand downwind. Warm afternoons began arriving between cold ones. Green points opened at the branch tips. The orchard's color changed first in places Nora saw only when she stopped working. A haze along the upper rows, small leaves unfolding beside old pruning scars, moss brightening on the channel stones. The blue-marked tree she had nearly cut produced buds along 2 scaffold limbs. Nora photographed them from several angles. She sent the best picture to Luis with no words. He replied, maybe. She considered blocking his number. At the garden center, spring deliveries crowded the aisles with bagged soil, seedlings, and customers who wanted to know which plant could survive shade, deer, drought, neglect, and a dog. Nora picked up every hour available. She loaded mulch into cars until her shoulders felt detached, then returned to the orchard and pruned until dusk. One evening, she came into the packing shed too tired to remove her boots. She sat in the recliner for what she intended to be 1 minute and woke 3 hours later with the work light still burning and one foot numb. The first blossoms opened the next morning. Only 5 at first, pale pink against dark wood on a tree in the upper section. Nora stood beneath them holding her coffee. She had seen apple bloom every spring she could remember. These flowers were not unusual. They were not even numerous. She reached up and touched the underside of one petal. For weeks, every sign of life had required scraping, bending, counting, or argument. The blossoms required nothing from her except looking. By the end of the week, white and pink spread unevenly through the priority rows. Some canopies bloomed heavily on one side and barely at all on the other. Several trees produced leaves without flowers. The uncircled lower rows remained sparse. But even there, color appeared among the tangles. Elaine arrived on a Thursday evening while Nora was repairing a broken section of channel. She parked near the shed and stayed in the car long enough to make the visit feel accidental. When she got out, she carried a covered casserole dish. "You didn't answer your phone," she said. "My hands were wet. I called twice. I saw." Elaine looked at the mud on Nora's trousers. "You could have sent a message." Nora held up her wet hands. Her mother set the casserole on the hood of the car. "Judith can barely grip a pen. She worked for less than an hour. She has a blister. I saw it happen." "You let her keep working? Have you ever successfully stopped Judith from doing something she already intends to complain about?" Elaine's mouth moved before she suppressed the smile. Nora returned to fitting a loose stone into the channel wall. "Her glove is on the dock. She accused you of hiding it so she'd have to come back. She's welcome to retrieve it." That's what I told her. Elaine walked to the channel. Water moved past Nora's boots in a clear, shallow ribbon. Her mother listened without appearing to. "You got the gate open," she said, "partway. Your grandfather used to flood the lower lane. The bypass was clogged. He knew, did he? He said fixing it would cause 3 other problems. That also sounds like him." Elaine watched Nora settle the stone. "You're wearing his shirt. It was in the shed. I washed it." "I know. Judith told you?" "She told me she brought the sheets." Nora waited, giving Elaine room to say why she had washed a dead man's work shirt and then stood outside while someone else delivered it. Elaine looked toward the blossoms instead. "Those are pretty." "They are. Does that mean fruit?" "Some. If they pollinate. If weather holds. If pests don't get them. So no." "So maybe." Her mother's gaze sharpened. "You're starting to sound like Luis. I've been threatened with worse." Elaine folded her arms. "The taxes are due in June. I know. Pretty flowers don't change that." Nora pushed the stone harder than necessary. Water clouded around it. "I didn't ask you for money. No. You arrange your life so asking would feel like surrender." The accusation landed because it contained care and resentment in equal amounts. Nora straightened. "You arrange help so accepting it feels like agreement." Elaine looked at her for a long moment. Behind them, blossoms stirred in a light wind. "I brought chicken and rice," she said. "I have a refrigerator now. You have a dormitory refrigerator that freezes lettuce. It only did that once. Eat the casserole by Saturday." She returned to the car without walking the rows. The forecast changed that night. Nora saw the frost warning while eating Elaine's chicken and rice from a bowl balanced on her knees. The temperature had been predicted to hold near 36. Now the low read 27, with clear skies and little wind. She called Luis. "I saw," he said. "What can we do? How much money do you have?" "Assume none, then less." He came over anyway. They walked the orchard as the temperature fell, checking bloom stages. The upper rows were farther along than Nora realized. Pink buds could tolerate more cold than open flowers, but the open flowers and newly set fruitlets were vulnerable. The lower slope, where cold air collected, faced the greatest risk. "We can run water in the channel," Nora said. "Wet ground holds heat. A little. Mow the row middles lower. Tomorrow. Cover the young grafts. You haven't made the grafts yet, the replacement saplings then. Yes. What about heaters? I have 6 old propane units for 18 acres, for where they matter most. Nora called the garden center and told her manager she could not work Friday. The silence on the line lasted long enough to become a warning. "This is the 3rd shift you've changed," he said. "I covered 2 others. That's not the same as being available when scheduled." "I know." "Do you?" Nora looked through the shed doorway at the blossoms turning gray in the last light. "I can't come in." She spent Friday mowing the strongest row middles close, opening the channel feed and hauling Luis's heaters into position. They wrapped the replacement saplings in frost cloth and checked propane fittings with soapy water. Luis made her eat before dark. At midnight, the orchard shone under a hard field of stars. The heaters glowed in 6 small circles. Water moved along the right boundary. Nora walked between rows carrying a flashlight and an infrared thermometer, though checking the falling numbers changed nothing. 29, then 28. At 27, frost silvered the flowering ground cover. The air smelled faintly of propane and cold grass. Nora's breath drifted through the beam of her light. She stood beneath the blue mark tree, watching ice gather at the edges of its blossoms. "Come on," she whispered, as if the tree were choosing. Near dawn, the temperature touched 26. Sunlight finally reached the upper branches in a thin gold line. Nora waited until the blossoms thawed before cutting one open with Luis's knife. The center was brown. She opened another. Brown again. A third remained pale green. Luis moved from tree to tree, slicing blossoms and saying little. Some had survived, many had not. In the lowest rows, nearly every open flower showed darkened tissue. Nora stopped beneath a canopy that had been white the previous afternoon. "I should have done more." "With what?" Luis asked. "I don't know. That's not a tool." She looked across the orchard at 6 cold heaters, the wet channel, and hundreds of blossoms she could not protect. Luis closed the knife. "Don't count fruit the morning after frost. I can see what's dead. You can see what you cut open. It's enough." "No." His voice hardened. "It is damage. You will call it damage until the trees show you the crop." Nora wanted to argue, but exhaustion had taken the shape of weight inside her. A petal loosened above them and fell onto the shoulder of Walter's gray shirt. She brushed it away before Luis could see her hand shake. Luis saw anyway. He took the knife from Nora's hand and folded it shut. "Go sleep. I have to shut down the heaters." "I will. They're yours. That is how I know how to shut them down. We should check the upper rows again." We checked them. The suns only reached one side. Luis stepped between Nora and the next tree. "You are walking like somebody rearranged your bones. Go inside." "I'm fine." "Then go inside easily." She glared at him. He pointed toward the packing shed. Nora made it as far as the loading dock before sitting down. The next thing she knew, Judith was beside her holding a travel mug and arguing with Luis in a whisper. "She can't sleep out here. She is asleep." "That's not what I meant." Nora opened her eyes. Judith jumped. "Good Lord." "You were whispering loudly," Nora said. "I brought coffee. Is it from the gas station?" "No, I'll take it." Luis had already turned off 5 heaters. Smoke and steam drifted low among the rows. Judith's sedan stood near the shed, with a blanket hanging out of one door. Her missing glove lay on top of Nora's backpack. "What are you doing here?" Nora asked. "Elaine told me there was a frost warning." "And you came after the frost. I didn't know there was an overnight shift. There wasn't supposed to be." Judith looked downhill at the browned edges of the flowering ground cover. "How bad?" "I don't know." Luis, 50 feet away, raised one arm in approval. Judith lowered herself onto the dock. "That must be driving you insane. I'm considering cutting open every blossom." "And would that help?" "No. Then you should drink this before I do." The coffee was hot, sweet, and strong enough to blur the first edge of Nora's exhaustion. Judith wrapped the blanket around her shoulders without asking. I thought you came for your glove, Nora said. I did. I'm very attached to it. It has a hole. We've all had a difficult month. Louise returned carrying 2 empty propane cylinders. She needs 4 hours. Judith stood. I'll stay. With what qualifications? I can prevent her from walking outside. You couldn't prevent her from moving into a shed. That wasn't my assignment. Nora let them steer her into the back room. She kicked off her boots and lay down on the cot while insisting she would not sleep. The blanket smelled faintly of Judith's basement and cedar blocks. When she woke, sunlight filled the cracked window. Someone had covered Elaine's casserole dish and left 2 aspirin beside a glass of water. Louise's truck was gone. Judith sat in Walter's recliner reading Nora's orchard notebook. Nora pushed herself upright. That seems to be a family habit. Judith closed the notebook. I was looking for your emergency contact. In the tree counts? I got distracted. You're my emergency contact. Judith looked surprised. Since when? Since I filled out the lease on my apartment. You didn't ask. You would have said yes. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask. Nora drank the water. Will you? Judith looked down at the notebook in her lap. Yes. The word was quiet and immediate. They did not assess frost damage that day. Louise forbade it, and Judith enforced the prohibition with more pleasure than the responsibility required. Nora cleaned the heaters, ate, and went back to sleep before dark. The garden center removed her from the following week's delivery shifts. Her manager was courteous. Spring was busy, he said, and he needed people whose availability was predictable. Nora could keep her Saturday and Sunday hours and pick up openings, but there would be no guarantee. She stood between pallets of fertilizer while he explained. Customers moved around them with carts of petunias and tomato cages. I understand, she said. I know you have something going on. The orchard. Right. The farm. Orchard. He nodded as though granting the distinction. I hope it works out. Nora finished the shift loading 20 bags of mulch into a pickup owned by a man who complained that each bag had become lighter since last year. On her break, she opened her banking app and moved the returned portion of her apartment deposit into checking. It covered the June property taxes with $38 left. She made the payment that evening from Walter's desk. The confirmation screen produced no satisfaction, only a brief cessation of dread. She wrote paid beside the figure in her notebook and underlined it once. Then she turned the page and made a new list: fuel, compost, dormant oil, replacement pipe, food, electricity. The list did not become friendlier when itemized. 10 days after the frost, the surviving fruit began to show itself. Nora found the first tiny apple on a tree in the upper block, no larger than the end of her thumb. Its skin was dull green and the petals clung dryly around it. On the same cluster, 2 blackened flowers had fallen away. She called Luis and made him walk up to see it. 1 apple, he said. 1 more than you expected. I expected a tree. You could pretend to be impressed. I am pretending. More fruitlets appeared over the following week. The lower rows had lost most of their open bloom, exactly as Nora feared. But trees that had flowered later held scattered clusters, and the better-drained upper rows retained enough fruit to require thinning in places. Not a full crop, not even close, a crop. Nora updated the map in green pencil. The color accumulated slowly, tree by tree. Luis brought a bundle of dormant scion wood wrapped in damp paper and stored in a plastic bag. You saved these? Nora asked. I cut them during the first inventory. Without telling me? If I told you, you would have named them. The sticks came from the Old York and 2 other surviving varieties Luis believed worth preserving. He had kept them cold while the orchard rootstock woke. They started on a damaged tree whose central leader had broken years earlier, leaving 2 poorly placed limbs around a sound trunk. Luis made a clean cut, split the stalk, and shaped the bottom of a scion into a wedge. Cambium has to meet cambium, he said. Not bark to bark. The layers are different thickness. I remember. Remember with your hands. Nora fitted the second scion. Luis made her remove it and cut the wedge again because one side was uneven. When it finally seated correctly, she wrapped the graft and sealed the exposed wood. "Too tight?" she asked. "Not yet." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll check it instead of assuming." She made 14 grafts that afternoon. Each looked small and improbable against the old trees. The new wood could not contribute to this harvest or the next. Success meant nothing more dramatic than a living shoot and years of future training. 3 weeks later, 8 had failed. The buds dried without opening. On 2, Nora had not aligned the cambium. On another, moisture had entered beneath the seal. She unwrapped one that had begun growing and found the tape cutting into swelling tissue. Luis stood beside her while she stared at the groove. "I did exactly what you showed me." "No, I watched you." "That is not the same. You said tight enough to hold and loose enough to grow. That is not a measurement. Neither is weather." Nora sliced the tape away. The graft bent dangerously in the wind, and she splinted it with a thin stick. "I'm trying to save them," she said. "You're trying to prevent every kind of failure at once. That's how you make a new kind." He moved to the next graft. "Check all the wraps." She did. 2 more needed loosening. One union had already calloused cleanly. Pale tissue bridging, old wood and new. A green shoot extended 3 inches beyond the tip. Nora touched the leaves carefully. "Don't celebrate yet," Luis said. "I'm not. You have celebration on your face. It might just be poor judgment. Those often look alike." Grant arrived while they were finishing. He drove Walter's pickup down the lane too fast, sending gravel against the channel stones. A flatbed trailer followed behind, empty except for chains and a spare tire. Luis looked at the trailer. "Sold the mower?" "Grant got out. Buyer took it this morning." "How much?" Grant named a figure lower than his listing, but higher than Nora could have paid. Luis grunted. "What does that mean?" Grant asked. "It means I heard you." Grant turned to Nora. "I need the old loading ramps. They're in the shed." "I know." "Then why are you telling me?" "Because the building is locked." Nora wiped grafting seal from her fingers. "You said loose materials weren't included with my parcel. The ramps go with the trailer. They've been behind the sorting line since before Walter bought that trailer. They fit it. So do chains." Grant's jaw tightened. "I'm not arguing over scrap metal." "Good. Give me the key." Luis moved away to pack his tools, leaving the silence to them. Nora unlocked the shed herself. The ramps were heavy steel, each one nearly 7 feet long. Grant dragged the first across the concrete, knocking it against the sorting line. "Careful," Nora said. "It's already broken." "It's not broken. It hasn't run in 10 years. That's different." He gave her a look but lifted the ramp clear. Nora took the other end. Together they carried it to the trailer. Grant was breathing hard when they set it down. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the mild evening. "You could have let me use the mower before you sold it," she said. "I had a buyer. For 1 day, I needed it clean. You washed it after." He tightened a chain without answering. Nora watched his hands. He had always been good with knots, hitches, the practical motions Walter taught them both. Now he pulled the chain twice, checked the binder, and checked it again. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing." "You sold the mower and the flatbed. I inherited equipment I don't need. You said you wanted it. I changed my mind. Are you selling the tractor?" His expression told her before he spoke. "Why do you care?" "Because I asked to borrow it, and I said no." Grant. He threw the loose end of the chain onto the trailer. "Some of us don't get a year to decide whether our inheritance makes us feel fulfilled." Nora stared at him. For a moment, something frightened and furious showed through his face. Then he smiled in the old dismissive way, climbed into Walter's pickup, and shut the door. The truck pulled uphill with the empty trailer rattling behind it. Luis came to stand beside Nora. "You know what that was about?" she asked. "No. You think he's in trouble?" "I think he wanted you to ask so he could punish you for asking." The answer felt accurate and incomplete. Nora looked down at the graft in her hand. Its new shoot trembled in the wake of Grant's truck, but held to the old wood. She adjusted the splint without tightening it. The splint held. Grant's explanation did not. For 3 days, Nora kept hearing the sentence he had thrown at her. Some of us don't get a year. It followed her through pruning, into the garden center, and down the channel while she reset stones. By Sunday evening, she was angry enough to call Elaine. Her mother answered on the 4th ring. Is something wrong? Does something have to be wrong? You called Judith. I call you. You respond to me. That's different. Nora sat on the loading dock, unlacing one boot. Why is Grant selling everything? A pause. Not long, but careful. You'll have to ask him. I did. And he behaved like Grant. That could mean several things. He's selling the tractor too. The equipment belongs to him. I know who it belongs to. Then what are you asking me? Nora looked across the loading yard. Brush piles waited to be chipped. The old sorting line remained buried beneath dust and fallen packing paper. Nearly every task on her list had another machine sitting invisibly behind it. Is he in trouble? Elaine exhaled through her nose. His contracting work was slow last fall. He took on debt expecting 2 projects that didn't happen. How much debt? That is his business. You know, I know enough. And the inheritance was supposed to cover it? The inheritance was Walter's decision. Did Walter know? Nora. Did he? He knew Grant needed something he could use. The answer was precise enough to avoid a lie. Nora pressed her thumb into the sore arch of her foot. And I needed 18 acres I couldn't afford. I tried to tell him the division was uneven. Nora went still. When? When he first made the will. What did he say? That he had considered it. That's all? Yes. There was no hidden explanation. No final speech Elaine had concealed. No certainty from Walter that the orchard would prosper. He had looked at his family, made his choices, and refused to defend them. Why didn't you tell me? Nora asked. Because you were already determined to interpret the orchard as faith in you. You don't know how I interpret it. I know you. The old answer. The locked room. Elaine's voice softened. Grant is not selling things to spite you. He could have loaned me the mower for 1 day. He could have. The agreement surprised Nora more than a defense would have. Then why did you back him? Because it was his to refuse. That doesn't make the refusal decent. No, Elaine said. It makes it his. Nora pulled off her other boot. A blister had opened along her heel, leaving a pink stain inside the sock. Are you going to help him? She asked. I already offered. And? He said he doesn't need help, but he'll sell everything Walter used. That is apparently different. Nora could hear her mother's hurt beneath the dry words. Grant had arranged his life so accepting help felt like failure. Nora had done the same thing and called it independence. I have to go, she said. Why? My foot's bleeding. What happened? Good night, Mom. Nora, clean it before you put a bandage on. I know. You say that too quickly. So do you. She ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. The orchard was full of inheritance that could not be sold separately. Roots, drainage, damaged limbs, years of deferred work. Grant had received objects with prices. Nora had envied him for that. Now she wondered what it did to a person when everything he received arrived already converted in his mind to what it could pay off. The next morning, Nora found crescent-shaped scars on 23 young apples. They appeared first in row 2, shallow curves cut into the skin beneath feeding punctures. Several fruitlets were misshapen. One had already dropped. Nora split it with her knife and found a pale larva near the seed cavity. She carried the fruit to Luis in a plastic sandwich bag. He held it up. Plum curculio. I don't have plums. It does not respect signage. How bad. How many? 23. How many trees? 7. How many fruit on the 7? I didn't count every apple. Then 23 is a number without manners. She stared at him. It enters a conversation before introducing itself, he explained. I understood the metaphor. They walked the priority rows together. By the time they reached the lower edge, they had found damaged fruit on 31 trees. Not every crescent contained an egg. Not every damaged apple would drop. But the infestation had arrived while Nora was focused on grafts, water, and money. Under the trees, fallen fruit hid in clover and unmown patches. Pick up every drop, Louise said. Daily if you can. Get it out before larvae reach the soil every day. You want next year to be worse? No, then every day. He showed her how to jar branches over a pale sheet early in the morning, when the adult beetles were less active. The first tree released nothing but 2 spiders and a fragment of bark. The second dropped a small dark beetle with a curved snout. Nora leaned over it. That. It's tiny. Your bank balance is tiny. Still affects your decisions. Control required timing, sanitation, monitoring, and a spray Nora had hoped to avoid buying. Luis did not tell her which choice to make. He listed what each option could accomplish and what it could not. What would Walter do? She asked. Complain about the price. Wait 3 days, then buy the spray. Was waiting useful? No. Nora bought enough for the priority rows, along with 2 monitoring traps. The charge left her account below the amount required for electricity. She picked up an open shift at the garden center and spent the evening after it gathering dropped fruit by headlamp. The damaged apples made a dull sound in the bucket. Some were barely larger than marbles. Others had grown around the scars, their shapes warped but their flesh still firm. Nora hated throwing them away. She hated more that leaving them would turn loss into next year's problem. For 11 days, she collected drops, checked traps, and treated only within the necessary windows. Her sleep narrowed into pieces. Once she woke sitting against the utility sink with an empty bucket between her knees. The graft she had splinted survived. 4 others did not. One morning, Luis found Nora cutting a failed graft back to sound wood. You missed breakfast, he said. I ate. What? A granola bar. What flavor? She thought too long. He took the saw from her. Come on. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I. We are going to the shed. He made eggs on Nora's hot plate while she cleaned fruit residue from the collection buckets. He found Walter's green sauce jar in his lunch cooler and put it on the desk. That stuff should be regulated, she said. It is, by taste. Nora ate 2 eggs, then a third. Luis sat in the recliner and studied the old sorting line. The motor might still turn, he said. It's rusted solid. You test it? I looked at it. He waited. Nora pointed her fork at him. Looking is not a mechanical category. You have learned so much. They cleared debris from around the motor that afternoon. The electrical cord had cracked insulation, so Nora did not plug it in. 2 belts needed replacement. Several rollers turned by hand after Luis cleaned the bearings. Others refused. She wrote the parts and prices in her notebook. Why are we fixing this now? She asked. I don't know if I'll have enough fruit to sort. You have enough that beetles found you. That isn't comforting. It means you should find out where fruit goes before it is ripe. Nora looked through the open shed door at the upper rows. Tiny green apples hid among leaves. Some would fall during June drop. Some would be thinned. Some were already marked by frost or insects. The packing houses won't want this volume. No. A farmer's market means weekends, a table fee, boxes, and standing there instead of harvesting. Yes. What did Walter do with seconds? Toward the end? Left them. I mean before. Sold some for cider. To who? Different operation. Closed years ago. So that doesn't help. Mara Chen might. Nora knew the name from bottles on local store shelves. Chen Ridge Cider operated in a converted dairy building outside town, small enough that its seasonal releases sometimes sold out and sometimes remained discounted through February. Does she buy local fruit? Nora asked. She buys useful fruit. Mine isn't ripe. Then don't ask her to buy it. What am I asking? What useful means? Mara Chen met Nora beside the cidery's loading door 2 days later. She was in her 40s, compact, with black hair twisted up beneath a faded cap and clear safety glasses resting on top of her head. Stainless steel tanks rose behind her in the cool, yeast-scented room. Luis had not come. "He said you had Yorks," Mara said. "Some. Wine sap, too. Several I haven't identified. How many bearing?" "I don't know yet." Mara nodded as though that was the correct answer. "What do you have with you?" Nora opened a small box. Inside were 6 immature apples, 2 sound, 2 frost-scarred, and 2 damaged by curculio. Mara picked up the ugliest one. "This is trash." Nora's stomach tightened. Mara pointed to the feeding scar. "If the larva reaches the interior, I don't want it. If the fruit starts rotting around damage, I don't want it. Cosmetic marks are different." She lifted a frost-scarred apple. "This might press fine once mature. Shape doesn't matter to the mill. So cider grade seconds. Sound seconds. People hear cider grade and think, I buy every bad decision they make." Nora looked at the rows of tanks. "What do you test? Sugar, acid, tannin, flavor, storage condition, and whether you deliver what you said you'd deliver." "I don't know what I can deliver." "Good. Don't invent a number." Mara cut the sound York with a small knife, examined its seeds, and tasted a sliver. Her face gave nothing away. "Too early," she said. "Bring me ripe samples before you harvest the block. Separate varieties if you can. Unknowns stay separate until we know whether they help or hurt. What kind of volume would matter to you? Less than commercial packers? More than 6 apples?" Nora smiled despite herself. "That's a wide range. It protects us both." Mara returned the box. Luis said Walter's lower orchard was gone. He didn't say gone. He said neglected past reason. That sounds like him. He also said you're too stubborn to know the difference between work and punishment. Nora looked toward the loading door. "He talks a lot when he isn't around. He paid for his last press run in fruit and opinions. Did you use the opinions?" "Not intentionally." Mara walked her out, then stopped beside Nora's hatchback. "If the Yorks make it," she said, "call me. I can use some sharpness. Not a truckload. A modest lot. It was not an agreement. No price had been discussed. The apples had not survived summer, and Nora had not proved she could harvest, sort, or deliver them. Still, on the drive home, she found herself calculating bins. At the orchard, evening light lay across the newly visible rows. Nora carried the sample box to the blue-marked tree near the gate. One branch held 7 young apples. She counted them twice, then wrote the number in her notebook without a question mark. 7 apples became 5. Nora stood beneath the blue-marked tree with pruning shears in one hand and 2 marble-sized fruitlets in the other. Both were sound. Neither had frost damage or feeding scars. She had removed them because the cluster was crowded and the branch was too weak to carry everything it had set. "This feels backward," she said. Luis was thinning the next tree. Small apples dropped through the leaves around him. "Most useful work does. We already lost fruit. And now you want the tree to waste energy deciding which fruit to lose later? I want it to keep what survived. You want a branch with 7 miserable apples or 5 decent ones? 7 decent ones. Then buy a different tree." Nora put the fruitlets in her pocket instead of dropping them. By the end of the row, both had warmed against her leg and developed bruises from her keys. She threw them into the sanitation bucket with the damaged drops. Thinning demanded a kind of faith she did not possess. Each removed apple looked like money, proof, and supper. Luis kept reminding her that a tree did not care about the meanings she assigned to its crop. It responded to weight, light, moisture, and injury. "Trees are rude," Nora said. "They are honest." That's what rude people say. They thinned the strongest upper rows and left the sparse lower trees alone. Frost had already made most decisions there. On several branches, Nora removed only insect-damaged fruit. The remaining apples hung far apart, hard green shapes under thickening leaves. The blue-marked tree kept 5. Heat settled over the foothills before June ended. Mornings began humid and still. By afternoon, the air above the loading yard trembled, and Nora's shirt clung to her spine before she reached the third row. Rain appeared on forecasts, divided into promising blue blocks, then vanished or broke against the next ridge. The flowering mix between rows came up unevenly. Clover spread in green mats where moisture held. Small white and purple blooms appeared along the upper contour. In other sections, the seed produced thin threads that browned almost immediately. Luis crouched in one bare patch and pressed his fingers into the soil. "Too shallow," he said. I followed the rate on the bag. Seed rate, not planting depth. The instructions said surface sow. Surface is not the same as leave it for birds. I raked it. "You frightened the dirt." Nora dropped beside him and dug with 2 fingers. Dry soil gave way to cooler earth an inch below. "Do I reseed?" "Not now. Protect what came up." "More compost? If you have it?" "I have electricity. Use that." She mowed the living ground cover higher to shade the soil and cut the dead growth lower around the trunks to reduce competition. Every evening she walked the channel, lifting leaves from screens and checking each outlet. The spring feed dwindled but remained clear. Then the water stopped below row 10. Nora found the dry channel at sunset. Above the break, water backed against a section of wall and seeped into the bank. Below it, stone lay pale and dusty. She called Luis, got no answer, and started digging. A buried pipe carried water beneath an old crossing. Roots had entered around a cracked joint and packed the interior with fibers and silt. Nora exposed the pipe by headlamp, widening the hole until she could kneel beside it. The crack ran farther underneath than she expected. She drove to the hardware store 5 minutes before closing, bought the wrong coupling, returned the next morning, and exchanged it for the right size, plus a short length of pipe she had not budgeted for. Luis arrived while she was cutting away the damaged section. "You should have waited," he said. "For what?" "Daylight. It is daylight. You started last night. The lower rows were dry. They've been dry for years. That isn't an argument for one more day." He examined the exposed joint. "Cut another 2 inches. The crack ends here. The visible crack ends there." She cut farther. A hairline fracture extended beneath the mud. Nora looked at him. "You could act less pleased." "I am pleased you found it before you glued the fitting." "You found it? Then I am pleased with myself." They repaired the crossing and packed gravel beneath it so the pipe would not bear the weight alone. When Nora reopened the feed, water traveled through the new joint, disappeared under the lane, and emerged below in a muddy rush. She ran downhill beside it. The first outlets coughed air, then water spilled into the shallow distribution lines near the lower rows. Not enough to soak the entire orchard at once, enough to move section by section. Nora stood ankle-deep in mud, directing the flow with a shovel. Luis watched from the crossing. "Close up or 2 in 20 minutes, he called. "Don't drown it because you're sentimental. I can't hear you. You can." For 9 dry days, Nora rotated water through the priority blocks. The ground cover held moisture better where it had established. Compost rings darkened around the trunks. Leaves stopped curling along the margins. The channel became the orchard's schedule. Nora woke twice each night to change gates, her alarm vibrating beneath Walter's gray shirt folded beside the cot. She learned to move through the rows without fully waking. Once she opened the same gate twice and flooded a section near the shed. Another time she fell asleep on the loading dock with a wrench in her hand and woke to Judith placing a paper bag beside her. "I brought breakfast," Judith said. Nora sat up. "What day is it?" "That's encouraging." "Tuesday?" "Friday." Nora looked horrified. "It's Tuesday," Judith said, "but your face was worth it." She had returned for the glove 3 weeks earlier and had come back twice since then, always with a reason. The second visit was to return a glass casserole dish. The third was because Elaine had purchased too many tomatoes. This time, the paper bag contained 2 biscuits and a jar of iced tea. "You can simply say you're visiting," Nora said. "I prefer an alibi." Judith had started keeping work gloves in her trunk. They spent the morning sorting Walter's wooden bins. Some had rotten bottom boards. Others held nails or pieces of the old line. Nora marked sound bins with green chalk and repairable ones with yellow. Judith dragged a broken lid from the stack. "Your mother says Grant sold the tractor," I assumed. "He also sold the sprayer. Did she tell you why?" "She said his finances are his business, which means she knows and disapproves." Nora pried a bent nail from a bin. "He wouldn't let me borrow any of it." "I know. Did she say that too?" "No. You have said it several times." Nora set the nail in a jar harder than necessary. Judith brushed sawdust from her trousers. "Elaine has always confused refusing to interfere with being fair. That's a convenient belief when the unfair thing benefits the person she's protecting. She protected you, too." "When?" The question came quickly enough to sting them both. Judith looked toward the back room. The smoke detector Elaine had bought was visible through the open door. So was the fire extinguisher, the clean gray shirt, and the covered casserole dish Nora had washed but not returned. "Not in the way you wanted," Judith said. "That's not an answer. No, it's what I have." They worked without speaking until the sound of a truck entered the lane. Grant parked beside Judith's sedan. He climbed out and stared at the open rows as though he had taken a wrong turn. The summer canopy hid much of the dead wood that remained. Mowed strips ran between the strongest trees. The clean channel flashed along the right boundary. Brush no longer swallowed the loading yard, and flowering clover softened the ground beneath the upper rows. Grant's gaze moved from the channel to the old packing shed on the left. "You can see it now," Judith said. "I could always see it. That's not what I meant." He opened the pickup bed. Inside were 6 folded picking bags, a crate of hand tools, and 2 rolls of conveyor belting. Nora stepped closer. "Where did those come from?" "The equipment barn. I thought everything there belonged to you." "They go with the orchard. The loading ramps went with your trailer. The buyer didn't want these." There it was. The explanation that protected generosity from being recognized. Grant lifted one roll of belt. Nora took the other end. "You sold the sorting line parts separately?" she asked. "They're not parts. They're old belt stock. Why didn't you throw them away? Because I'm not wasteful." Judith coughed into her hand. Grant glared at her. "Do you want to carry something?" Together, they brought the belts into the shed. One was too narrow. The other matched the sorting line almost exactly. Luis arrived before Grant could leave. He inspected the belt, then looked at him. "Kept this dry," Luis said. "It was in the loft. Walter bought it after the old belt cracked. Then why didn't he install it?" "Because the old one kept moving." Grant glanced at the silent machine. "This one isn't." "Motor turns now." Nora had rewired the damaged cord with Luis's help and cleaned the bearings. The motor ran, but the brittle belt slipped whenever they loaded weight onto it. Grant set the crate down. "Show me." Nora hesitated, then plugged in the line. The motor hummed. An uncovered shaft began to turn, and 3 rollers shuddered into motion. Dust sifted from the frame. Grant crouched near the drive wheel. "Your tensioner's crooked." "The bracket is bent," Nora said. "You mounted it backward." Luis leaned closer. Nora looked from the bracket to the faded diagram she had copied into her notebook. Grant was right. He switched off the motor, found 2 wrenches in the crate, and removed the bracket without asking. His movements were quick and certain. "You remember this line?" Nora asked. "I remember Granddad yelling because I put a peach pit through it. This orchard didn't grow peaches. I was eating a peach." Luis nodded. "Machine 1. Grant looked at him. "He told you?" "He told me everything you broke. He never told me he caught his sleeve." Luis glanced at Nora. "He told me things that made him look good." Grant reversed the bracket and aligned the tensioner. When they fitted the replacement belt, it sat evenly across the rollers. They turned the line on again. This time the belt traveled without slipping. Judith placed one empty apple box at the intake. It moved down the line, wobbled over a roller, and fell off the far end with a crash. All 4 of them laughed. Grant's laughter lasted only a second, but it was the first Nora had heard from him that did not make someone smaller. The smile left his face when he noticed her watching. "Don't run it without guards," he said, "and that motor's going to overheat. I'll monitor it. You'll forget. I won't." He wiped grease onto his jeans. "You always do this." "Do what? Turn junk into a test everybody else is failing." The warmth went out of the shed. Nora looked at the repaired belt moving through the old machine. "I didn't ask you to come." "No, you make sure of that." Grant left before she could answer. Judith watched his truck climb the lane. He came to bring the belt. He came because the buyer didn't want it. Both can be true. Nora switched off the sorting line. In the sudden quiet, she heard water traveling outside the right wall, steady through the repaired crossing. That evening, the heat finally broke. Rain moved over the ridge in a dark curtain and reached the upper rows with a soft roar. Nora walked into it, letting it soak her braid and flatten Walter's shirt against her back. The apples on the blue-marked tree turned under the weight of the water, but held. One had begun to show the faintest red along its sunward side. The color deepened after the rain. It came first on exposed fruit at the tops of the trees, a muted red over green, rather than the polished color Nora associated with grocery store apples. The shaded sides remained pale. Frost left rough bands across some skins, and curculio scars distorted others. But the sound fruit grew heavier. Nora began carrying a refractometer Luis loaned her, a small tool that measured dissolved sugar in juice. She crushed slices with the back of a spoon, placed drops on the glass, and held it toward the light. 11, she said after testing a York. Luis was repairing a picking bag strap on the loading dock. "Taste it." I measured it. "Your mouth works without batteries." She bit into the apple. The flesh snapped, sharp enough to tighten her jaw. Beneath the acidity was a dry sweetness she remembered from Walter's bins, though these apples were smaller. "Not ready," she said. "Now you measured something useful." She tested starch with iodine, checked seed color, and learned again that red skin could lie. Fruit on the sunny edge looked finished before the interior had changed. Apples that released easily from one tree clung to another of the same variety. The unknown trees complicated everything. Luis identified two as Rome by shape and growth habit, then changed one entry back to unknown after tasting it. "You sounded sure yesterday," Nora said. "I was sure it looked like Rome." "Looking is not finish that sentence and I leave." She smiled into the notebook. They chose 8 trees for the first sample pick. Nora sorted the fruit in the packing shed, separating clean apples, sound cosmetic seconds, and anything with rot or internal damage. The repaired conveyor moved them slowly beneath the work lights. Grant had been right about the motor. After 12 minutes, the housing grew hot enough that Nora could smell old insulation. She shut it down. Luis placed his palm near the motor without touching it. "Bearings are working too hard. We cleaned them. Cleaning does not make them young. Can we replace them?" "Yes." Nora already knew what came next. "If I stop asking what it costs, you are exhausting to teach." They removed the motor and carried it to the desk. One bearing matched a spare Luis had at his packing house. The other did not. Nora ordered it, paid extra for faster shipping, then built sorting tables from sound bin boards so work could continue by hand if the line failed. Mara received the ripe samples on a hot Monday morning. She had asked for each variety in a separate paper bag, marked with row, tree numbers, and pick date. Nora arrived with 7 bags and a box of seconds. Mara lined the apples along a stainless steel counter. She tested firmness first, then sugar and acid. Some slices she chewed and swallowed. Others she spat into a small container. The York made her pause. "Still sharp," Mara said. "That's what you wanted. I want acidity, not punishment. It'll gain sugar. Probably." Nora waited while Mara tested fruit from an unknown tree in lower 9. The apple was yellow-green with faint russeting near the stem. Its flesh browned quickly after cutting. Mara tasted it and frowned. "Bad?" Nora asked. "Interesting. Is that good?" "Not always." She cut a second piece, then handed it to Nora. The apple tasted mildly sweet at first. A drying bitterness followed and stayed at the back of Nora's tongue. Tannin? Nora asked. Some. Might be useful in a blend. Might make everything taste like furniture. Luis would have liked the description. Mara moved to the next bag. One unknown variety was soft despite acceptable sugar. She rejected it for her purposes. A group of wine saps tested well but needed more time. The frost-scarred samples were sound beneath the skin. Then she opened the box of seconds. 3 passed. 2 showed hidden breakdown around insect damage. 1 smelled faintly fermented near the core. This is why sorting matters, Mara said. I cut samples from every damaged lot. You cut the ones you brought. Nora looked at her. Mara's expression remained neutral. I'm not accusing you. I'm telling you a clean sample doesn't make a clean bin. I'll inspect the bins. Every grower says that before harvest gets ahead of them. I'm not every grower. No, most growers bring more than 7 paper bags. The remark was dry rather than cruel, but Nora felt heat rise beneath her collar. Mara wiped the knife. How much fruit do you estimate? Between 8 and 11 full orchard bins if drop stays normal. Maybe 2 more of usable seconds. That much? Across the whole property. How confident? Nora pictured the map. Tree counts, average fruit per sampled limb, and the wide uncertainty she had written beside every result. Enough to promise 6 bins, she said. Not enough to promise 11. Varieties? 2 York. 2 wine sap. 1 mixed sharp varieties. Identified and recorded by bin. 1 sound seconds. Anything beyond that, I confirm before picking. Mara considered the numbers. I could take 4 guaranteed. 2 York, 1 wine sap, 1 mixed. Options on 2 additional, including seconds, after I inspect the first load. Nora's disappointment came too quickly. That's less than half. It is what I can use without inventing a product for your crop. What about sound fresh market fruit? I'm a cidery. I know. Mara folded her arms. You want me to be impressed by the orchard. I'm deciding whether I can use the apples. Nora looked down at the samples. She heard Elaine asking what the flowers meant, and Grant calling the orchard a test everyone else was failing. 4 bins, she said, with 2 options. Price differs by grade. I reject rot, active larvae, and contaminated drops. Cosmetic damage alone stays eligible. When do you pay? Half on accepted delivery. Balance within 14 days. 7. 10. Nora had not planned to negotiate. 8. Mara smiled for the first time. You practiced that in the car? No, you should have. They settled on 10 days because Mara's bookkeeping ran in fixed cycles. The purchase agreement fit on 2 pages and contained no transformation. The minimum payment would cover the bearing, fuel, harvest supplies, and the remainder of the season's orchard expenses. If the 2 optional bins were accepted, Nora could reserve enough to begin pruning next winter without using her garden center income. She signed. Mara signed beneath her and tore off a copy. Don't pick the Yorks all at once, she said. Call me after the next samples. Nora put the agreement in a plastic sleeve before leaving the building. In the parking lot, she sat inside her hatchback with the windows open and read it again. 4 bins. Not 11. Not a fortune. Not proof that every decision had been correct. 4 bins someone had agreed to buy. She called Judith. Is it bad? Judith asked immediately. Why do you always answer that way? Because you never call to discuss television. I have a buyer. There was silence, then a sharp inhale. For the orchard? For apples. I knew that. No, you didn't. I understood it a second later. Nora laughed. 4 guaranteed bins, possibly 6. How much is a bin? 8 to 900 pounds, depending. You have that many? I think so. Another silence. Different this time. Nora, Judith said, and stopped. What? I'm trying not to say something sentimental. Thank you, I'm proud of you. That was sentimental. I did my best. Nora pressed the agreement flat against the steering wheel. Don't tell Elaine yet. Why? I want to tell her myself. When? After Mara accepts the first delivery. So if something goes wrong, you can keep it secret. That's not why. It is a little why. Nora looked through the windshield at the cidery loading door. Can you help sort? Yes. You don't know what you're doing. Neither did you in February. That isn't reassuring. Luis will be there. No. Luis starts his early harvest next week, and you're helping him. I owe him. Judith hesitated. Can he let you off? Nora watched two cidery workers roll an empty bin across the concrete. That's not how it works. Luis's early varieties reached picking maturity 3 days before Nora's first York block. Nora reported to his orchard at 6 in the morning. A line of empty bins waited between the rows, and picking bags hung from the trailer rails. His trees carried a heavier, more uniform crop than hers. The sight produced envy so clean that she almost admired it. Luis handed her a bag. Platform is fueled. You can take it Friday afternoon. I need it Thursday. Mara wants samples again Friday. Then pick samples by ladder. Nora stared at him. I worked 4 days in spring. And you said harvest. You said we'd talk about harvest. We are talking. That is dishonest. No, it is annoying. He pointed toward the rows. I need 3 days. After that, platform is yours through next week, and I bring 12 empty bins. 12? You estimated 11. Mara guaranteed 4. Trees don't read contracts. Nora adjusted the picking bag strap. 2 days. 3. 2.5. Have you ever left half a day when fruit was waiting? No. 3. She agreed. Harvesting Luis's orchard taught her how unprepared she was for her own. Full picking bags bruised shoulders and hips. Apples had to be lifted and twisted, not pulled. Bags had to be emptied gently through the bottom, not dumped. A careless picker could erase value faster than the sorting line restored it. By the third evening, Nora's fingers were stiff, and the skin beneath both shoulder straps felt burned. Luis parked the pruning platform in her loading yard after dark and unloaded 12 empty bins. I only owe you 4, Nora said. You owe me 3 days. The bins are borrowed. That still help. Yes. He said it without embarrassment. Nora looked at the bins arranged beside the weathered shed. What if I don't fill them? Then they're easier to return. The first York picking began the next morning. Judith arrived in old jeans with her work gloves. Nora trained her on color, firmness, stems, and damage. For the first hour, Judith asked about every apple. During the second, she became overconfident and put 3 rotting fruit into the sound seconds bucket. Nora made her retrieve them. You said ugly was acceptable, Judith protested. Ugly and rotten are different. That sounds like Luis. I've been threatened with worse. By noon, the first bin held a shallow layer of apples. The emptiness above them seemed enormous. Then they moved to the next tree and the next. Nora worked from the yellow platform while Judith picked low branches. Sound fruit went into padded bags. Drops stayed separate. Frost-marked apples with clean flesh went to seconds. Anything soft, leaking, tunneled, or rotten went into discard. The sorting line ran in 10-minute intervals after Nora installed the new bearing. It still rattled. It still heated. But it moved fruit past the work table, where Nora and Judith inspected each apple before it entered a clean bin. At dusk, the first bin was full. Nora wrote York, upper 2, pick 1 on the card and stapled it to the side. Judith leaned against the sorting table, too tired to manufacture a reason for staying. That's 1. 1 out of 4. 1 out of whatever the trees give us. Nora switched off the line. The belt coasted to a stop. Outside, the filled bin sat in the loading yard with 3 empty ones waiting behind it. Beyond them, long rows descended into evening shadow. The old shed, the channel, and the ordered upper block formed a system that had not existed a season ago. Nora placed her hand against the bin's rough wooden side. For the first time, the orchard had produced something too heavy for her to carry alone. Mara's truck arrived at 8 the next morning with a hydraulic lift gate and a driver who looked doubtfully at the gravel lane. Nora walked ahead of him down the slope, pointing out the washed edge near the gate and the tight bend past the shed. Luis followed with a tractor and bin forks borrowed from his own packing house. He made Nora operate the forks. "You've done this more recently," she said. "You need to do it when I'm not here. I'd rather learn without $600 of apples in front of me." That would have been yesterday. The forks entered the pallet openings crooked on Nora's first attempt. She backed away, lowered them, and tried again. The second time, the full York bin lifted cleanly. Apples shifted with a faint rolling sound inside it. She carried the bin across the loading yard at walking speed. Mara's driver guided her with one hand, then stepped back as she aligned it with the lift gate. The bin settled without dropping, tipping or splitting apart. Nora released the breath she had been holding. Luis looked at the empty forks. Again. The second bin was not full. Mara had agreed to inspect it anyway, along with samples from the wine sap block. Nora loaded it last, then followed the truck to the cidery in her hatchback. Mara met them at the receiving area with a clipboard, a scale, and 3 empty tubs. She drew fruit from different depths rather than accepting the apples visible on top. Each sample went through the same inspection: firmness, internal condition, rot, insect damage, and random cuts. Nora watched the rejected tub. 2 apples went into it, then a third. Mara cut a frost-scarred York. Its flesh was clean. "Cosmetic," she said, placing it with the accepted fruit. The next apple looked sound until the knife exposed brown tissue near the core. Mara added it to the reject tub. "How many before the bin fails?" Nora asked. "It's not a single number. Depends what's wrong and how it's distributed. That's not comforting. It isn't meant to be." They reached fruit from the lower half of the bin. Nora recognized the slightly smaller apples Judith had sorted on the second afternoon. One had a healed curculio scar. Mara cut directly through it. No tunnel, no breakdown. Accepted. When the inspection ended, Mara wrote figures on the clipboard and handed it to Nora. The York bin passed. The partial bin would be paid by accepted weight. The rejection rate was low enough that Mara exercised her option on the next York bin if samples remained consistent. Nora read the page twice. "Do you want me to point to the word accepted?" Mara asked. "No, you've been staring at it. I'm checking the weights. Those are also accepted." The first payment arrived electronically before Nora left the cidery. It was not large. Her banking balance still contained fewer digits than Grant's mower had sold for. But for the first time, money had entered the orchard account because fruit had left it. She sat in her car and divided the amount immediately. Fuel, electricity, the replacement bearing, Luis's propane, next winter's pruning supplies, a reserve for taxes. There was enough left to buy groceries without moving money from somewhere else. Nora drove back with the windows open. The empty loading yard startled her. For 2 days, the full York bin had occupied the center of it, solid and undeniable. Now only the square impression of its base remained in the dust. Luis was at the channel cleaning the screen. "It passed," she called. He looked up. "Of course. You could have said that this morning." This morning, it had not passed. Mara took the option on another York. Luis nodded once, as though checking an item from a list. Then he bent over the screen again. Nora walked closer. "Is that all? What do you want?" "I don't know." Enthusiasm. He straightened and looked across the upper rows. Walter sold fruit from here for 43 seasons, then none for 5. Today, it sold again. The quiet way he said it took the humor out of Nora's reply. Luis pulled the screen free and rinsed leaf fragments from it. "Do not make me perform. I wasn't. You were. Maybe a little." He replaced the screen. "Good work." The words warmed her more than enthusiasm would have. Harvest gathered speed. Wine saps ripened unevenly, forcing Nora to pick the same trees in multiple passes. One unknown block softened too quickly and went almost entirely into discard or personal use. The bitter yellow-green apples from lower 9 developed enough tannin and acid that Mara requested a small separate lot for trial blending, but she refused to promise she would want them again. Nora recorded every bin, tree, pick date, grade, and rejection. She marked trees whose fruit stored poorly and branches that broke under weight. The notebook grew swollen with dust and juice. Judith came after work 3 evenings a week. She became good at separating sound seconds from rot and terrible at stapling bin cards straight. She complained about her shoulders, Nora's hot plate dinners, and Luis's refusal to call any apple pretty. Elaine did not come. She asked questions through text messages. Are you eating? Did the buyer pay? Does the shed heater work? Nora answered each one and received practical replies. Save the receipts. Don't rely on one customer. Test the heater before cold weather. Grant sent nothing. Judith reported that he had sold the tractor and most of the newer machinery. He was still working, still paying down what he owed, and still refusing Elaine's offers. Nora did not ask for numbers. The sorting line overheated twice. The first time, Nora shut it down before damage. The second, the new bearing seized because she had over-tightened its housing. She and Luis removed it after midnight, and Nora finished the bin by hand while he repaired the mount. You're doing it again, he said. What? Trying to stop movement by tightening. It was vibrating. Things move. Machines shouldn't move where they're bolted. Everything moves somewhere. Another proverb and you can go home. It is 1 in the morning. I would love to. He stayed until the line turned again. By the final York delivery, Mara had accepted both optional bins. The first wine sap load tested above the agreed sugar level. Even the cosmetic seconds passed after Nora discarded more than she wanted. 6 bins went to the cidery. 3 smaller bins of sound fresh fruit went to a local produce distributor Luis knew, at a price low enough to prevent pride and high enough to cover their picking. Nora kept 1 mixed bin for late sales and storage tests. The remaining fruit stayed on trees not yet ready or in rows too weak to justify a full pass. The harvest was smaller than the orchard once produced and larger than Nora had dared write into any budget. She totaled the numbers at Walter's desk. After operating expenses, taxes, and money reserved for winter work, the orchard showed a modest positive balance. It did not pay Nora a real wage for the hours she had given it. It could not replace her car, renovate the shed, or support another person. It could support another season without being sold. Nora sat beneath the faded orchard map while the sorting line clicked as it cooled. For months she had imagined calling Elaine at this moment. In some versions, Nora spoke casually and let the numbers perform the revenge. In others, she repeated every sentence from the gate until her mother apologized for each one. Now the phone felt heavy in her hand. She called anyway. Elaine answered with background noise behind her. I'm at Judith's. Is Grant there? Another pause. Yes. Put me on speaker. Nora, if this is about, it's not about his equipment. A muffled exchange followed. Then Grant's voice came from farther away. What? Nora looked at the ledger. The first harvest is sold, she said. Nobody answered immediately. Judith broke the silence. All of it? Everything ready and marketable? 6 bins to Mara, 3 to a produce buyer, and 1 held back. There's still some later fruit. How much did you make? Grant asked. Enough. That's not a number. No. Elaine's voice came closer to the phone. Enough for what? Operating costs, taxes, winter work, another season. Judith made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and tried to cover it with a cough. Grant said, After paying yourself? Nora looked at her labor column. No. Then you didn't make money. I made the orchard solvent for the next season, by working for free, by building something I own. You can't live on that. No, Nora said. I still have the garden center, and I'll need more off-season work. The admission did not feel like surrender. It felt like refusing to decorate the truth. Elaine said, When can we see it? Nora glanced through the shed door. Late fruit remained in the lower rows. Several brush piles still waited at the margin. Stumps marked every tree she had removed. The packing shed roof was patched, not finished. Nothing about the property would withstand a fantasy. "Sunday," she said. 5 o'clock. Grant murmured something Nora could not hear. "What?" she asked. "I said I've already seen it. You saw the upper rows in July." "I saw enough. Then don't come." Elaine said his name in warning. Nora closed the ledger. "The gate will be open." Sunday arrived clear and cool after a dry night. Nora spent the morning refusing to prepare for them. She cleaned the sorting table because it needed cleaning. She stacked empty bins because they needed stacking. She replaced one loose board on the loading dock and stopped herself from painting it. By late afternoon, golden light traveled sideways across the hillside. It warmed the leaves, the restrained clusters of remaining apples, and the old timber of the packing shed. Cool shadows stretched between the contour rows. Clover and small flowers filled the strongest row middles. Along one margin, the retained stumps formed a limited, uneven line through the grass. At 4:45, Nora drove to the county road and parked her hatchback outside the upper gate. She put on her faded denim work jacket despite the warmth. Her dark hair was secured in its usual low braid. The weathered green backpack settled across both shoulders. She carried nothing else. Alone, Nora passed through the open gate and walked down the cracked gravel lane with her back to the road, caramel leather boots striking the pale stones. Her small figure moved into the lower third of the immense hillside. Above and beyond her, long ordered rows descended around the weathered packing shed on the left, their surviving mature trees green and carrying a believable partial early autumn crop. The restored stone channel ran clear along the right boundary. The blue sky remained bright above the ridge. No one was there to watch her stop. The orchard was not pristine. Young grafts stood protected beside old trunks and would not bear for years. Empty spaces remained where trees had been lost. Patches of ground cover had failed. The shed leaned in the same direction it always had. But from the gate, the rows converged around it as if the place had remembered its own shape. Nora continued down the lane. At 5 after 5, an engine passed on the county road without slowing. Nora turned. Elaine's sedan disappeared around the bend. A minute later, it returned in reverse, stopped above the gate, and pulled onto the shoulder. Elaine got out first. Grant stepped from the passenger side. Judith emerged from the back seat, looking from the open gate to Nora with both hands pressed against her mouth. Elaine did not close her car door. Her gaze traveled over the lane, the shed, the shining channel, and the rows descending farther than the eye could follow from the road. "We passed it," she said. Grant stared at the orchard. "No," he said quietly. "This isn't what was here." Nora looked from Grant to the orchard. "Yes," she said, "it is." He stepped through the gate as if expecting the view to correct itself. Elaine followed more slowly. Judith remained by the car until Elaine looked back at her. "You knew," Elaine said. "I knew she was working. You've been here." "Yes. And you didn't tell me it looked like this?" Judith lowered her hands. "I told you the rows were coming back. You said she cleared vines." "She did clear vines." "Judith, I also told you to turn at the gate. You said it too late. I didn't expect you to drive past your own father's orchard." Elaine looked down the cracked lane. "I didn't." Nobody answered that. The four of them walked toward the loading yard. Nora stayed several paces ahead at first, then slowed when the silence behind her became too strange. Grant left the lane at row 1 and pressed a hand against the blue-marked tree. Only 2 apples remained on its branches. The others had been harvested with the final York pick. "That one was dead," he said. "I almost cut it down my first day." "What stopped you?" "Luis?" Grant rubbed the bark with his thumb. So he did know. He knew it was alive. That wasn't the same as knowing it would produce. Grant examined the orange ribbons still tied around 2 trunks farther down. "Why leave those?" Some are coming out after the ground firms. Some stumps stay for erosion control. I mean the ribbons. So I remember what has to happen next. His eyes moved over the gaps between living trees. How many did you lose? 132 were marked for removal. We've taken down 91. More may fail this winter. Elaine stopped. That many? You couldn't see most of them from the gate. I could see dead trees. You could see a neglected orchard. Elaine met Nora's gaze. The laughter from late winter seemed to return between them. Smaller now, but sharper because nobody could pretend it had been harmless. Judith stepped into the row and touched a low branch. This was covered in vines. I remember, Nora said. My shoulder remembers. Grant looked at her. You worked out here? 3 times. 5, Nora said. Judith frowned. We agreed not to count the day I brought lunch. You sorted for 2 hours. I was trapped by rain. It didn't rain. It looked possible. Grant stared at his aunt, then laughed once. The sound held surprise rather than contempt. Elaine did not join him. She walked to the edge of the channel and watched water travel between the clean stones. You opened the spring feed, she said. Partway. Full flow is too much for the lower crossing. It always flooded there. The pipe was cracked. And now, replaced and bedded in gravel. Elaine followed the channel with her eyes until it curved beyond the shed. Your father used to come inside with his boots soaked and blame the hill. Your father, Nora said. Elaine's mouth tightened. Nora had called Walter Granddad for so long that his other relationships sometimes seemed like parts of a history she had not witnessed. Before he was the old man teaching her cuts and hiding pain, he had been Elaine's difficult father. He had woken her before daylight, expected labor, refused help, and made love feel like something a person proved by enduring him. Nora stepped closer to the channel. Luis said he called you when Granddad stopped clearing it. Judith looked at Elaine. Her mother kept her gaze on the moving water. He did. What happened? I called your grandfather, and he told me Luis was exaggerating. He said the lower rows needed rest and he was changing his management plan. Did you believe him? No. The answer arrived without defense. Then why didn't you come? Nora asked. Elaine folded her arms, though the evening was warm. Because every visit became a fight. He would accuse me of treating him like an invalid. I would tell him he was behaving like one. Then he wouldn't answer the phone for a week. So you stopped. Yes. The water passed over a shallow ledge, making a low, steady sound. Elaine looked across the rows. I told myself it was his land, his choice. I used the same words with Grant because they sounded fair the first time. Grant shifted his weight. Nora remembered the grocery bag on the gate, the guest room offer, and her mother standing outside the shed with Walter's shirt in her hands because practicality could not carry it through the door. You still laughed, Nora said. Elaine flinched. Yes. Why? Grant looked toward the shed as if the question did not concern him. Judith watched Elaine with the exhausted patience of a sister who already knew the answer. Elaine pressed her lips together. Because if you could do something with it, then I had to consider how quickly I decided there was nothing left to do. The admission changed nothing physical. The trees did not grow straighter. The years of neglect remained in every scar and missing trunk. Nora found that she did not want Elaine humiliated. She wanted her to stand inside the truth without renaming it. You did leave it, Nora said. I know, and I couldn't have fixed it when Granddad was alive if he wouldn't let me. I know that too. I'm still angry. Elaine nodded. I assumed you would be. That isn't an apology. No. Her mother looked at her directly. I'm sorry, I laughed. I'm sorry I made you feel as if getting the worst-looking part of the estate proved something about you. Nora waited. Elaine's eyes shone, but her voice remained controlled. And I'm sorry I called it practicality when some of it was relief that the difficult part belonged to somebody else. Judith looked down at her shoes. Grant kicked a loose stone from the lane. Nora let the apology settle without rushing to make it comfortable. Thank you. Elaine nodded again. It was not forgiveness, but it was a place to set the first piece of it. Judith cleared her throat. I owe you one without the group arrangement. You already pulled vines. That was work, not an apology. It was mostly complaining. It can be two things. Judith removed her glasses and wiped them on the hem of her shirt. I laughed because Elaine did, and because disagreeing would have meant admitting I remembered this place before it went bad. I chose the easy side of the gate. Nora glanced at the faint scar below Judith's thumb, where the blister had healed. I'm sorry, Judith said. No translation. Nora squeezed her aunt's hand once. No translation. Grant had moved toward the loading yard. He stood before the stacked bins, reading the cards Nora had retained from accepted deliveries. How many pounds? He asked. Nora told him. He whistled softly. Off these trees? Most came from the upper and middle blocks. What was the price? Different by grade. And after expenses? I told you on the phone. You said enough. It was enough. He turned. That's not how business works. You want the ledger? If you're making a claim, I'm not asking you to invest. I didn't say you were. You're acting as if I need to prove it to you. You invited me here. To see the orchard. The whole point is that it worked, isn't it? Nora heard the old trap opening. The orchard either proved she was right about everything or exposed her as foolish. There was no room inside that argument for frost, failed grafts, bad fruit, unpaid labor, or help from other people. The point, she said, is that it's working. Grant looked irritated by the tents. She led them into the shed. The sorting line occupied the center, still old, patched, and guarded where Grant had warned her. A row of clean bins stood against one wall. On the desk, the ledger lay beneath the faded orchard map. Nora opened it to the harvest totals. Grant read every column. Elaine stood beside him. Judith lowered herself into Walter's recliner and immediately sank. Oh, this thing is terrible, she said. Nora almost smiled. You have to rock forward. I am rocking forward. You're going sideways. I know what direction I'm going. Grant ran one finger down the expense column. You didn't include labor. I recorded hours separately. Then this profit isn't real. It's an operating margin, not a wage. I still need outside income. How many hours? A lot. That's not a number. 863 through last week. The figure quieted him. Nora pointed to the reserve. That pays for winter pruning, channel maintenance, and the first inputs next spring. If the stored fruit sells, it adds to the cushion. If it doesn't, the orchard still enters the next season without debt. Grant looked toward the map. And if next year's frost is worse? I earn more off-season, cut expenses, prune fewer rows, maybe lose money. Then what? I decide then. He closed the ledger harder than necessary. You make it sound simple. No, I'm telling you it isn't. I sold the equipment because I needed the money. You think that means I didn't care what Granddad left? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Nora studied him. I thought you were selfish. Grant gave a short laugh. There it is. I also thought you got the easy inheritance. His expression shifted. Did you? She asked. He leaned both hands on Walter's desk. The sales covered the cards and one loan. Not all of it. Elaine started to speak, but he raised a hand without looking at her. I'm working, he said. I'll cover the rest. Nora nodded. Okay. Grant's shoulders tightened. That's all? What do you want me to say? That selling was reasonable. It was reasonable for what you needed. He looked at her then. But refusing the mower for one day wasn't, she said. Laughing wasn't. Bringing the belt later doesn't erase it. I know. The words were so low she almost missed them. Grant glanced toward the sorting line. I didn't loan you anything because I'd already told the buyers the machines weren't being used. And because if you made this place work with the worst equipment, I knew how selling mine would look. How did it look? Like I took the useful part and still couldn't build anything with it. Nora rested her hand on the ledger. You paid what you owed. Some of it. That's what you needed it to do. He stared at the floor, then nodded once. I shouldn't have laughed. The apology was rough, incomplete, and his. Nora accepted it the same way. Outside, late sunlight had turned deeper amber. They walked beyond the loading yard to the upper edge of the restored rows. From there, the old shed sat to their left, the channel traced the right boundary, and the hillside opened beneath them. Judith shaded her eyes. Walter would recognize it. Nora looked at the stumps along the margin, the sparse lower blocks, and the young grafts protected against deer. He'd recognize the cost, she said. Elaine stood beside her. He'd complain about the ground cover. He'd say flowers steal water, Judith said. Then he'd ask why there weren't more bees, Grant added. They laughed quietly. A gust moved through the canopies. One late apple dropped into the grass with a soft thud. Elaine watched Nora pick it up and inspect the skin. "Do you really plan to stay?" Nora looked at the patched shed, the clean water, the bins waiting for another harvest, and the rows whose next problems were already written in her notebook. "I already have," she said. The answer did not end the work. It ended the question. When the others drove away, Nora remained at the open gate until their taillights disappeared along the county road. Then she turned her back to it and walked down the cracked gravel lane toward the old packing shed. Water moved beside her. The orchard held the last of the light.